Chapter 820. C. Even though Muefe had never met the legendary leader of the Bai organization, C, he had heard of C's appearance from others. Ever since C became the leader of the slave organization, C's name had spread far and wide. Muefe had even heard that in some of the larger cities, many people used C's name to scare children, saying that disobedient children would be captured by C. Muefe had also heard from some slave traders that those words might not be lies. As for the scythe-like object in C's hand, it was actually a long handle with the word tend on it. At the top of the handle was a sharp weapon in the shape of a beast's fang. Unlike the other katanas used to untie knots, the one on the top of C's long handle looked more like a katana than a larger katana. It was made of metal with sharpened edges. Under the night sky, it glimmered with a cold glint as C moved. The scythe at the top of the long handle had an engraving of an eye, representing the people of the province. Looking at the engraving, one would feel as though one was being watched, like a piece of meat placed on a chopping board while the other party was measuring one's worth. Muefe sized up this slave leader, who could scare children to tears with just his name alone. His vigilance grew. Lu Zhai, C.I. Du, Chu Li and the rest were also on high alert. After C appeared, Robber 7, who was tied up like a cocoon, glanced over before continuing to study the night sky. It was as though he couldn't feel C's murderous gaze. He was as calm as ever, at least on the surface. Xiao Xian glanced at C, then turned his head to scan his surroundings. Other than C, there were others. Clang, clang, clang. Under the moonlight, following the sound of hurried running, 6 slender figures in black robes with half-masked faces appeared. Each of them held a chain in their hands. The clanging of the chains shone with a cold glint. The 6 of them split into 2 sides, with 3 on each side. Together with C, who had appeared first, they formed a semicircle while Xiao Xian and the rest stood in the center of the semicircle. The formation of these men in black gave everyone a familiar feeling. It was as if they were about to surround and hunt. However, the Yanjiao people surrounded and hunted ferocious beasts, while the Hughes surrounded and hunted the hunters. Muefe had heard of a saying before. No one who had been bound by these chains had ever managed to escape. C and the other 6 stopped at a distance of 50 steps away. Their gazes were icy cold, and the temperature around them seemed to have dropped because of them. Their icy gazes swept across Xiao Xian and the others, and finally stopped at Robber 7. It was as if they were frozen in ice, and their gazes were as sharp as knives, as if they wanted to slice off Robber 7's flesh. It was impossible for Robber 7 to not notice such intense stares. However, Robber 7 continued to stare at the night sky, ignoring C and the others. He pursed his lips indifferently. The men holding the chains were C's trusted aides, and they were also the ones who had hunted Robber 7 down. To Robber 7, these people had been looking for him for so long, and yet he managed to escape so easily. They were nothing to worry about, and were all useless. Instead of thinking about these useless fools who had rushed over, he might as well think about how to escape. C's cold, murderous gaze shifted from Robber 7 to Xiao Xian and the others. He frowned in dissatisfaction. "Where's the thing?" His voice was like the friction of cold chains, sending chills down everyone's spine. Robber 7 stopped playing dead and rolled his eyes at C. "Don't ask me." He then pointed at Xiao Xian with his lips, signaling C to look to the side. C's brows knitted together, and his aura grew colder. He could sense that the stolen bone lock was no longer here, but when he followed the trail, he bumped into this group of people. His chilling gaze was no longer on Robber 7, but on Xiao Xian, who was leading the group. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was about to unlock his shackles and lock them onto his target. "Yanjiao." Although his tone was doubtful, C's words had already confirmed his suspicions. C looked at the other 5. Other than Xiao Xian, none of them were Yanjiao, and their identities were different as well. However, C's gaze lingered on Gan Xie for a little longer. The other 4 were easy to deal with, including the only Yanjiao person present. C did not find anything special about them. The only one that puzzled him was Gan Xie. Based on his judgment, this person should be a dead man. It was strange that he did not understand. However, the most important thing right now was to retrieve the stolen bone lock. Everything else could wait. Due to the fire seed, there were always some strange tribes that stood out from the rest. Perhaps that dead man was one of them. C wondered if he could take a beating. If he could he be sold as a slave for a high price? Due to his profession, C's first thought was still the value of this person as a slave. After a brief moment of contemplation, Si looked at Xiao Xian. He knew that this group was led by Yanjiao, so he still had to keep an eye on Yanjiao. Did you take it? Si asked. Without waiting for Xiao Xian's reply, he continued. Hand it over. He did not give Xiao Xian any chance to explain. He only wanted the item, and did not want to hear any nonsense. It's not here, Xiao Xian replied. Of course I know it's not here. What I'm saying is you bring it back to me. Or else. With a flick of his wrist, a blinding light flashed. The razor-sharp edge of the Shi blade was pointed at Xiao Xian's position. Or else what? Xiao Xian retorted. Or else, all of you will be captured and turned into slaves, Si said in a cold voice. Just as Robber 7 had said, the members of the Shi organization continued the tradition of the people of the province. In other words, they viewed everything as slaves. Generally speaking, they would not attack free people. The so-called free people were those who had left their tribe and were not part of any organization. They were free people who moved about freely. However, if they came across a free person who they deemed to be valuable, they would turn them into slaves. This was also the reason why many people were wary of Shi. Of course, during special times, such as when the slave trade was in short supply, they would deliberately attack the tribes. Attacking the tribes on this side of the continent might cause some trouble, but if they attacked the tribes on the other side of the sea, the trouble would be much smaller. Did they not know that the Yanjiao tribes were difficult to deal with? Of course they did. Before they attacked, they had done a preliminary investigation. For safety's sake, some of them even attacked the tribes around Yanjiao. However, they had underestimated the Yanjiao tribe's capabilities. They did not expect Jifeng to personally order them to attack Yanjiao's territory. How could they just let a captured slave go? This was not in line with Shi's style. However, Jifeng was the one who said it. Although Si was dissatisfied, he would not destroy his partnership with Jifeng over such a small number of slaves. Now, however, things had changed. Since they had encountered Yanjiao, and they had something that belonged to them, Jifeng had no say in this matter. Shi's style was to bite and not let go of any meat they touched. Even if they could not capture them, they would make them bleed and let them know the power of the #1 slave organization, Shi. The cowardice of others was their glory. Muefe looked at Si suspiciously, confirming that Si was not joking. Did they really dare to defy Jifeng's orders and attack Yanjiao? Muefe turned to Xiao Xian, wanting to see the reaction of the Yanjiao Grand Elder. However, he did not see anything out of the ordinary from Xiao Xian's expression. He only felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. Capture me. Xiao Xian's tone was calm, as if he was just casually asking if the other party had eaten. There was not a hint of anger on his face. However, Robber 7, who was not far from Xiao Xian, shuddered violently. Then, Robber 7 became excited again, laughing maniacally in his heart. Ha 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 ha. He said it. Si really did say it. Just when Robber 7 thought he was the biggest thorn in Yanjiao's side, just when he thought his future was bleak, an idiot who could draw more hatred than him popped up out of nowhere. How could Robber 7 not be excited? Robber 7 knew that the tribesmen did not like the term slave. Back in the day, the few major tribes had fought a battle of wits and courage with the slave masters of the desert. Si's words just now had drawn a lot of hatred. He looked at the few people beside him. They were burning with anger. Chu Li's fists were clenched so tightly that they cracked. Lu Zhai and Ci Du's faces were pulled long. Gan Xie was still the same. He did not get angry, instead, he was curiously sizing up Si and the men in black with chains around him. Robber 7's mood began to brighten. After being captured by Yanjiao, he had said everything he needed to say. He even cooperated and acted as bait here. The reason he was so straightforward was not only because he was afraid of Xiao Xian, but also because he wanted to find an opportunity to slip away while Yanjiao was negotiating with Si. After all, the Yanjiao did not like the slave masters who captured tribesmen as slaves. However, he did not expect Si to be even crazier than he expected. Yes, in Robber 7's opinion, anyone who dared to tell Xiao Xian to capture you as a slave was a lunatic. Robber 7 raised his head to look at the night sky. The stars were shining brightly tonight. It was a good time to get out of here. Chapter 8:21. Actually, Si had wanted to make a move on the Yanjiao tribe for a long time. Back when the Yanjiao tribe was still deep in the forest, their presence was insignificant, and the Bai people rarely went deep into the forest to tangle with the other tribes. However, after the Yanjiao tribe's great migration, They made their presence known and attracted the attention of the Bai people. Other people might think that a powerful tribe was too troublesome to deal with, but the Bai people were different. In the eyes of the Bai people, the more powerful the tribe, the more powerful the people, the higher the value of the slaves. Their way of looking at people was to measure the value of goods. The people of the Feather tribe would be proud of catching a bird with beautiful feathers and would flaunt it. The Bai people would also flaunt when they sold a slave at a high price. Moreover, the higher the rank of the slave master, the higher the standards of the slave master. They would not be interested in normal people, but for a leader like C, it was fine if they did not make a move, but once they did, it would have to be at the level of a tribe leader. However, Jifeng's warning made C hesitate for a moment. He did not make a move immediately. Instead, he raised the arm that was not holding the she blade and pointed at Robber 7, who was tied up like a cocoon. He said coldly, "Give him to me and I'll take his life." Having his chief's bone lock stolen was C's greatest humiliation. C could still track down the stolen bone lock through certain means. As for Robber 7 who stole the bone lock, of course he would not let him go. At the same time, C also felt that if Robber 7 died, no one would be able to steal the bone lock from him again. He did not think that anyone had the ability to do so, not even the tribesmen in front of him. Therefore, Robber 7 must die. If he died, he would no longer be a threat, and no one would be able to make him feel this humiliation. Sensing the murderous aura, Robber 7 did not move, but Chu Li and the others were already nervous. They gulped and looked at Xiao Xian. Seeing that Xiao Xian did not move, they continued to remain silent. Robber 7 looked at Xiao Xian. He would be lying to himself if he said he was not afraid. He knew that Xiao Xian was in charge of this group of people. He also wanted to see what Xiao Xian would do, but he was more worried that Xiao Xian would kill him on the spot. Seeing that there was no response, C glanced coldly at Xiao Xian and the others. "You're not handing it over?" As his voice trailed off, C waved his arm and black shadows the size of fingernails shot out from his wide black sleeves. They flew into the bushes and headed straight for Xiao Xian and the others. So. The grass in the path of the black silhouettes that shot into the grass was cut in half. The cut grass flew up and sprayed out from the ground like countless raindrops. As for the black silhouettes that were thrown out, they crashed into the ground not far from Xiao Xian and the others. C's action was the signal to attack. Xiao Xian raised his saber. "Gan Xie, watch Robber 7. Don't let him die so easily." As for you guys, Xiao Xian glanced at Mu Fa, Chu Li and the others. "Don't die so easily." Chu Li, Lu Zhai, Ci Du and Mu Fa, who had led the team through countless trials and tribulations, were speechless. The difference in treatment was a little frustrating. Although Xiao Xian had told them to protect themselves, they were the leaders of their respective tribes. How could they be willing to do that? How could Gan Xie take on 6 of them by himself? Although the moon wasn't very bright, with the combination of moonlight and starlight, with everyone's eyesight, they wouldn't go blind even if it wasn't as bright as the day. Gan Xie's night vision was far better than others, and even Ci Du, Chu Li and the rest had trained themselves to hunt at night after many hunts with the flaming horns. In the forest, the beasts wouldn't let them go just because they couldn't see well at night. Tonight's moon and starlight were much brighter than when they were in the forest. At least they weren't obstructed by the towering trees. Moreover, not all of the Bai people had good night vision. Their movements were also limited in the dark. After receiving C's signal, the 6 black-clothed men around him moved swiftly. They flung out the chains in their hands with brute force and agility. At the same time, there were threads that were not much thicker than a strand of hair. Together with the chains, these threads were easy to overlook. However, it was these threads that made the chains seem alive, releasing even more lethal force. If traps were to be described as interlocking, then these threads and chains were 2 of the most important factors for the Bai slave masters to set up their traps. This group of Bai people with a long history of slave trading were all experts in knots and ropes. Therefore, they couldn't miss a single detail or movement. Robber 7 was so happy that he wanted to set off firecrackers. Haha, it's starting. It's starting. However, in order to minimize his presence, Robber 7 had to suppress his excitement. He no longer looked at the sky and pretended to be a philosopher. He observed the battle with great interest and looked for an opportunity to escape. He didn't want to stay. Even if Xiao Xian had no intention of handing him over to C, Robber 7 didn't think he would have a good ending if he fell into Yanjiao's hands. It was safer to escape. Mu Fa paid close attention to the strings and chains, silently calculating the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. He thought to himself, C's subordinates are indeed as frightening as the rumors say. Not only are they strong, their teamwork is flawless, and their ability to predict and analyze is also impeccable. Perhaps before they even make a move, they have already formed an intricate net in their minds, and the few of us are the prey that this net is trying to capture. Chu Li flicked his wrist. A round shield the size of 2 adult palms slid from his forearm to his wrist. He had asked Yan Zhao to help him get it made with Yan Zhao's new bronze. As the totemic patterns on Chu Li's body deepened, his entire body inflated. His palms and even his fingers grew in size. The round shield, which was originally slightly bigger, was now just right. Ci Du and Lu Zhai also picked up their weapons. Gan Xie was the only one who stood there barehanded. He didn't have any weapons on him. It was as if he couldn't feel the danger in front of him. Judging from his attire, he looked more like a leisure traveler. He was similar to many of the adventurers in the mainland. The chains plunged into the ground with a loud thud. The 3 men in black tugged at the chains. The arrowhead at the front of the chains had barbs, tearing up the soil and grass on the ground. The 3 men in black borrowed the force of the pull to leap forward. Clang, clang, clang. The chains seemed to have eyes of their own. They suddenly changed directions mid-air and chased after Chu Li and the others. Like a snake that had finally bared its fangs, it was about to hunt its prey. Once bitten, even if it was just a single bite, it would be close to hell. Both of Chu Li's feet stomped on the ground as he retreated rapidly. Looking at the sharp end of the chain that was less than half an arm's length away from his feet, he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. If his reaction had been just a little slower, or if he hadn't retreated far enough, his entire right foot would have been nailed to the ground. He glanced at Gan Xie from the corner of his eyes. He was still the same. Gan Xie's expression didn't change at all. He stood there silently like a lifeless stone pillar. Chu Li was impressed by Gan Xie's determination. Under such circumstances, he could still maintain his stone-like calmness. Chu Li couldn't help but wonder if Gan Xie would still be able to maintain his composure after being struck by the chains. That wasn't right. The Yanjiao people seemed to have told them that Gan Xie couldn't be killed. A chain escaped from the black-clothed man's hand. Like a long black snake under the night sky, it bared its poisonous fangs and went straight for Gan Xie, who was still standing there. To be exact, it was going for Robber 7, who was diagonally behind Gan Xie. When it came to other people, the slave masters prioritized capturing them. If they couldn't capture them, they would kill them. Robber 7, on the other hand, was given the order to kill without mercy by C. That was why they could slowly toy with Chu Li and Gan Xie, but when it came to Robber 7, they would kill him at the first opportunity. Without using any tools, Gan Xie grabbed the chain that brushed past his scalp with his bare hands. The sharp spikes of the chain that was shooting towards Robber 7 stopped a step away from him. It was as if someone had grabbed it by the neck. The spikes at the front of the chain drooped down weakly. On the other end, the black-clothed man tugged at the chain. It wouldn't budge, but he didn't panic. Due to the structure of the chain, it was normal for it to be caught. Not only was he not worried, he even had a mocking smile in his eyes. His other hand moved slightly. At the same time, the other black-clothed man's chain shot towards Gan Xie like a snake. Gan Xie raised his other hand to block the attack of the second chain. However, at the same time, the chain in his hand seemed to have come alive. It struggled and twisted in an S shape. Suddenly, it pulled apart and wrapped around Gan Xie. Mu Fa noticed the situation at Gan Xie's side. He wondered if he should go over and help. However, Ci Do, who was already heading over to help, suddenly retreated away from Gan Xie, as if he was avoiding the plague. Not only Mu Fa, even the black-clothed man who was chasing after Ci Do was surprised. What did Ci Do see? When Ci Do noticed Gan Xie's situation, his first reaction was to go over and help. After all, they were all on the same side. Moreover, Bai had one more person than them. If Gan Xie lost his ability to fight, their side would be at a disadvantage. However, just as Ci Do was about to go over, he saw a flash of red in Gan Xie's eyes. It was especially obvious in the darkness of the night. At that moment, Ci Do suddenly remembered that Gan Xie was different from them. The leader of Yanjiao had once told them not to get close to Gan Xie if they saw him in this state. Moreover, Ci Do had personally witnessed Gan Xie killing fearsome beasts during a hunt. Even now, he still had a lingering fear towards Gan Xie. Seeing Si Do retreat, Chu Li and Lu Zhai seemed to have thought of something and stopped in their tracks. Robber 7, who was watching the battle with great interest, suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't help but shiver. Gan Xie, who was bound by the chain, didn't panic at all. Instead, the strange red glow in his eyes expanded, as if it was about to overflow with viscous blood. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. Finger bones that were half the length of an arm glowed with a metallic luster as they appeared in Gan Xie's hand. They were like sharp swords that had been unsheathed. Under the moonlight, they flashed with a frightening cold light. A strange roar came from his throat. Sound waves shot out from his long fangs, exploding and spreading in all directions. It was extremely deafening. The chains around Gan Xie's body creaked weakly, as if they were about to break in the next second. Sand-yellow flames emitted from Gan Xie's body. Everything around him became cold and dry. The grass under his feet quickly lost its moisture, as if it was being baked by the high temperature. It went from fresh green to withered in less than a breath's time. Robber 7, who was closest to Gan Xie, felt his face tighten as if it was about to crack. No amount of cold sweat could relieve it. The 6 men in black stopped abruptly as if their feet were nailed to the ground. Their arched eyebrows were raised as they looked at Gan Xie in shock. Their pupils constricted at the sudden turn of events. They were dumbfounded by the scene in front of them. Which fucking tribe was this? Was this really a human? A half-beastman? No, not a half-beastman. They had captured so many half-beastmen as slaves, but they had never encountered a situation like this. This was not a half-beastman they were familiar with, nor was this a human they were more familiar with. Then what was this? A monster? It wasn't just the men in black who were stunned. Robber 7, who had been pretending to be calm, was also shocked. Every pore on his body was trembling from extreme uncertainty and suspicion. His heart was screaming for him to get away. Get away quickly. The atmosphere suddenly turned cold. Time seemed to have slowed down. Clouds floated in the night sky, covering the 2 incomplete moons. Even the stars were hiding away in fear, appearing dim. The night was even darker. No one moved. The 6 men in black were probably guessing and calculating Gan Xie's threat level in their hearts. Robber 7 looked at the situation in front of him and broke out in cold sweat. Help! Another monster. He suddenly wanted to blow the whistle for help. Being demoted was better than losing his life. But if he blew the whistle here, would the other robbers be able to hear him? In order to better escape with the chief's bone lock, Robber 7 purposely chose a route with fewer people. He was afraid that even if he blew the whistle until the end, no one would come to save him. At this moment, Robber 7 deeply understood one thing. You won't die if you don't seek death. Chapter 822. Robber 7's eyes darted around as he heard the sounds of battle from Xiao Xian's side. He wanted to look in that direction, but his neck didn't seem to listen to him. Perhaps it was his natural reaction. He had to pay attention to the person closest to him who could threaten his life. For example, the strange man with sharp claws and fangs. Crack! Crack! One of the chains around Gan Xie's body was broken by the force of the pull. This seemed to have triggered a chain reaction. Crack! 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 A series of cracking sounds erupted in a short span of time. The metal chains around Gan Xie's body snapped into small pieces and scattered on the ground. The sand-yellow flame around Gan Xie's body seemed to have been pushed away by the shockwave. Countless pieces of grass that flew into the air dried up and fell to the ground like sand. Gan Xie's breathing sounded like a blood-soaked beast swallowing flesh and blood. The red glow in his eyes intensified. His hard and sharp finger bones were like 10 high-quality knives as they scratched against the chains. Sparks flew everywhere as they made a sharp sound. The 6 men in black weren't the only ones who were stunned. Even Si Du and the others who thought they knew Gan Xie better were stunned. How were these human fingers? It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were made by a master craftsman. Otherwise, how could they create such an effect? Gan Xie firmly held onto the broken chains that were trying to escape. He pulled back and pulled one of the men in black towards him. Before the man could escape, Gan Xie's fingers were already around his neck. He looked like he was going to bite him, but before he could do so, he seemed to have smelled something unpleasant. He threw the man away in disgust, as if he was throwing away trash. The man in black who was thrown away crashed into the forest not far away. He broke a few tree trunks that were as thick as a man and fell to the ground. He slid across the grass for a long time before he stopped. He let out a painful cry and couldn't get up for a while. Gan Xie's blood-red eyes didn't even look at whether the man in the forest was dead or alive. He turned and looked at the other man in black. Looking at those blood-red eyes, the man in black's hand that was holding onto the chains trembled. After the clattering of the chains, there was a loud crash, followed by a short scream. Xi's eyes flickered, but he did not divert his attention to that direction. Instead, he sprinted towards Xiaoxian. His black robe fluttered as he dashed forward at high speed, shattering countless bits of grass that were flying in the air. The distance between Xi and Xiaoxian was not too far. Xi's movements were peculiar. Even though he was wielding a long-handled broadsword, he seemed to be gliding over the grass as if he was weightless. Xi waved his arms. The long, cross-hilted biscuit that resembled a beast's fangs drew an arc in front of him. The sharp Xi blade seemed to condense a despairing aura of death, as if it wanted to cut off all life. In the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of Xiaoxian. The icy aura of the blade came straight at Xiaoxian. The sound of the wind breaking was strangely sharp, piercing to the ears. Xiaoxian did not try to hide. At a time like this, he had no intention of wasting time with his opponent. He did not want to test his opponent's strength step by step. Instead, he chose to use the Yanjiao style, direct, barbaric, violent, and the most effective way to attack. Highly active totemic power coursed through every part of his body. It was as if there were air bombs exploding on the surface of his body. His aura was violent and ferocious. Clang! The sound of metal clashing was endless. The sparks from the clash of blades were especially eye-catching in the dark night. Every time Xiaoxian took a step forward, the ground beneath his feet would sink with a thunderous rumble. The entire floor seemed to be trembling. The leaves blown by the wind, as well as the soil and grass that were thrown into the air by the tremors, were initially scattered like a drizzle. However, as the two sides clashed again and again, it quickly turned into a violent storm. The vibrant green that was torn apart, the withered yellow that was drained of moisture, and the brown soil that was stained with pebbles were all gloomy under the night sky. Along with the two men's movements, they were wantonly swept away and blown away. Xi's wide black robes were torn in many places. Every time he waved his hand, a hole would appear. Bam! Xiaoxian once again violently deflected the biscuit that came slashing at him. Xi used the momentum to retreat. In the brief moment of respite, Xi's eyebrows were raised like the other men in black. He panted quickly, his narrowed pupils flashing with suspicion. He no longer had the domineering aura that he had before the fight started. More and more, he felt an uncontrollable sense of danger. The strange man guarding Robber 7 was one of them, and the other was the Yanjiao man before him. If it was only a guess at the beginning, he was now completely certain of the man's identity. From the information he gathered, and from what he learned from Ji Fong, there was only one person who fit this man's identity: Yanjiao's grand elder, Xiaoxian. Even though Xi already knew from Ji Fong that Xiaoxian was a dangerous character, the information he heard and understood was far more profound than experiencing it firsthand. How could this tribesman be so strong? However, if that was all there was to it, then there was nothing to worry about. Under the continuous collision of their auras and strength, Xi felt that he had a rough grasp of Xiaoxian's strength. The moment they collided, Xi felt as if the bones in his entire arm were about to break. It was as if the one who collided with him was not a human, but a gigantic beast. The Yanjiao man, who was rumored to be as ferocious as a beast, was not to be underestimated. However, under such brute force, he could still win with technique. A calculating glint flashed across Xi's eyes, but in the next moment, he felt the skin on his back tighten. Before he could think too much, he realized that Xiaoxian was ready to attack again. Again! Xi's eyes flashed with ruthlessness. His chest and abdomen shrunk back as he retreated quickly to buy himself enough time. Then he paused abruptly, his right foot stomping on the ground. His body moved with a twist of his waist and knees. With a flip of his palm, the cross-handled she was tossed into the air. Then he reached out with both hands to grab the cross-handled she and spun it. In an instant, the cross-handled she spun like the blades of a meat grinder. Before the flying leaves could even get close, they were already shattered by the she's blade aura. Based on Xiaoxian's previous attack power, even if he could hurt Xi, Xiaoxian himself would have suffered more serious injuries. No one was willing to charge into a meat grinder. Those who charged into the spinning, she would have been ground into minced meat. However, Xi's guess was wrong. Xiao Xian was even more ferocious than before. For a moment, Si wondered if Xiao Xian, this tribesman, was an idiot. Si thought his eyes must be playing tricks on him. He seemed to have seen a flash of white light under Xiao Xian's feet. It was fleeting and unclear, like a hazy fog that appeared and disappeared in an instant. Xiao Xian bent his knees slightly and lowered his body, like a beast ready to pounce on its prey in the forest. The next moment, he stomped his feet on the ground, flattening a large patch of grass that was above his knees. The entire patch of ground was lowered by a notch. Xiao Xian, on the other hand, was propelled by a powerful force. His body shot out like an arrow from a crossbow, bringing with it a strong gust of wind that could sweep a giant bear high into the air. His arm wielding the Shi's blade slashed out with the force of the impact. The air followed the movement of Xiao Xian's arm, setting off the sound of wind and thunder. The dirt and pebbles on the ground, the grass that was uprooted from the ground, and the flying sand from Gan Chia's direction were all pushed to the sides by the surging air waves. It was as if there was a ferocious beast roaring madly inside, chasing them away. There was no dodging, no other tricks. Xiao Xian directly and rudely rushed over. With every step Xiao Xian took, the ground shook. As Xiao Xian ran, the entire area began to shake. It made Si feel as if he was stepping on waves, unsteady on his feet. He did not know how to exert his strength. Under such an attack, he could not even execute 30% of his movement techniques. Si's heart skipped a beat. Xiao Xian's momentum had exceeded his expectations. The moment he saw Xiao Xian's explosive attack, he knew that he might not be able to block this round of attacks. When a ferocious beast attacked its prey, anyone with a little bit of hunting experience would know how fast and powerful its charge was. Xiao Xian's charge was much stronger than those famous ferocious beasts in the forest. Feeling the power of the blade, Si's heart raced uncontrollably. If there was enough light, one would be able to see that Si's face was as pale as a sheet. Clang, clang, clang. Bam, bam. Two powerful forces collided. The entire floor felt like it was about to be lifted up. Chu Li, Si and the rest felt an earthquake beneath their feet. The flying sparks converged into a glaring line of fire, breaking through the darkness. It was as if one's vision was being scorched. The power transmitted from the cross hilt to Si's arms instantly spread throughout his body. His arms were numb. Tsk. Countless tears appeared on Si's black robe. The torn fabric was swept high into the air before being shredded by the surging airflow. Si was pushed back dozens of meters. His knees were already sunk into the ground. His hair, disheveled by the wind, stood up diagonally behind him. Before the cold sweat could form, it flew back along his forehead as soon as it appeared. The whirring sound of Si's saber stopped. The saber in Xiao Xian's hand was like a steel bar stuck into a spinning fan blade, stopping its rotation. Bam! One of the horizontal bars of Si's saber's cross hilt was cut off. The falling horizontal bar hit the ground with a dull thud. It was like a heavy blow to Si's chest, making him want to spit out a mouthful of blood. Chu Li and the rest who had avoided the battle due to their inability to hold on looked at Gan Chia, who was still torturing Si's saber. Then, they looked at Xiao Xian, who had chopped off the handle of the legendary Si's saber, and fell silent. Forget it, all they had to do was protect themselves. They shouldn't add to the chaos. Although they didn't want to admit it, the reality was that Xiao Xian and Gan Chia were monsters on a different level from them. Suddenly, Si's gaze froze. He nudged Lu Zhai, who was beside him, with his elbow. Speak. Lu Zhai was watching the battle anxiously. He was startled by Si, so his tone was naturally unpleasant. Although there was no need for them to interfere, it was always good to be on guard. He didn't want to listen to Si's nonsense. Look over there. Si pointed at a spot not far behind Gan Chia. Lu Zhai was about to take a quick glance before retracting his gaze. However, when he looked over, his eyes widened in disbelief. He stared hard for 2 seconds before stuttering. Where is he? Chu Li and Mu Fa also looked over in confusion. They were equally stunned. All they saw was a cocoon-like ball of rope on the rock where Robber 7 was placed. However, Robber 7, who was originally tied up inside, was nowhere to be seen. They thought that Robber 7 had hidden his head away, so when Gan Chia was almost done torturing Si's saber, they took the opportunity to take a closer look. There was no one. It's empty, Chu Li exclaimed. Looking around, Robber 7 was nowhere to be seen. Gan Chia, who was in the midst of torturing Si's saber. Where was that little thief? Chapter 8:23. Of C's 6 men in black, only 3 were left. Half of them were gone, and the remaining 3 were no longer actively attacking. They were all injured to varying degrees and were fully on guard. Their gazes towards Gan Xie were filled with undisguised fear. If not for C's presence and the lack of orders, they would have retreated. Gan Xie wasn't unscathed either. Sharp arrowhead-like objects pierced his body, but not a single drop of blood flowed out. Gan Xie didn't seem to notice it either and was unaffected. This put a lot of pressure on C's men. They didn't want to meet someone like Gan Xie. Had they known, they would have advised C not to attack them. The most despairing thing was when the opponent broke your best and proudest trick. Moreover, it was a direct attack without any other tricks. It made them feel like they were about to break down. Wasn't C feeling the same way? The muscles on his arms were still twitching, and the fingers holding the hilt were trembling. His black robe was in tatters, and he looked like a beggar. Ever since C took over as the leader of C, he had never been in such a sorry state. However, his physical injuries weren't as severe as the psychological impact. There was a flattened protrusion where his fingers held the hilt. There used to be a horizontal bar there. The cross-shaped long-handled, she was a weapon modified according to the writing of the character Min. The cross-shaped long handle symbolized the frame used to tie slaves. In the Shi organization, the guilty slaves would be tied to the cross-shaped frame and burned or punished in other ways. But now, the long hilt in C's hand was just a straight rod. Both ends were cut off by Xiao Xian. The vertical hilt was connected to a large Shi. From afar, it looked more like a scythe. C regretted it now. Why didn't he listen to Ji Fong? He shouldn't have attacked when he knew his opponent's identity. What was the most important thing in a war? Information. C's understanding of Xiao Xian was limited. The Yi family, who had suffered a great loss, would never divulge Xiao Xian's affairs to outsiders. After all, it was the family's shame. Not many in the tribe knew about it, let alone outsiders. As a result, Hui, who was used to being tyrannical, had his ambitions inflated. When he extended his claws to another continent and was about to make a big profit, he met a tough opponent and even made a move. Back then, when C extended his claws and fangs to another continent, this was what he had in mind. I'll capture a few of you as my slaves. Do you think you can just cross the ocean and attack me? In fact, Yanjiao really dared. Not only did he come over, but he also brought quite a number of people with him. Before he made his move tonight, C thought, I asked you guys to hand over Robber 7, but you guys refused. Don't blame me for making my move. Capture them all as slaves and kill anyone who resists. You won't even have the chance to regret it. However, reality proved that C was wrong again. He personally took action with his trusted subordinates who were experienced in capturing slaves. Despite having an advantage in numbers, he was defeated so badly that even his cross-shaped handle was sliced into a stick. This wasn't just because of Xiao Xian's strength. At the same time, it was also because of the knife in Xiao Xian's hand. During the fight, C saw a cloud pattern on the knife. However, the fight was too fast and Xiao Xian's attacks were too fierce. There wasn't enough light, so C didn't have the time to take a closer look. However, with just one glance, C was certain that the knife in Xiao Xian's hand was made by one of the Gongjia family's craftsmen. Who in the Gongjia family made it? He had to go to the Gongjia family and ask for the truth. C's heart was filled with haze. His mind was filled with all sorts of thoughts. The muscles on his face twitched and his expression contorted. His eyes were filled with hatred, but in the end, his rationality won out. He chose to retreat. If this were to continue, forget about his 3 subordinates. Even C himself would be in grave danger. It was rare for the leader of the #1 slave trading organization to choose to back down. Moreover, he was forced to back down. Retreat. C roared indignantly. Finally, C gave the order to retreat. The 3 injured men in black heaved a sigh of relief. Without further delay, they kept their chains and left. Finally, they didn't have to face that monster. C and his men came and left in a hurry. Chase? Gan Xie asked. No need. Xiao Xian sheathed his knife and looked at the rock where Robber 7 had been. Only a rope cocoon was left there. He escaped. Gan Xie blamed himself. He was too focused on tormenting Robber 7, just now that the slippery robber had escaped. He was too arrogant. He thought that after his body became like this, no one could escape his nose. Even if there was only the slightest trace of blood, he would still be able to smell it. No one could escape from him. However, Robber 7 had tricked him and successfully escaped right under his nose. Robber 7 had changed the smell of his sweat to avoid C's tracking insects. He had also changed the smell of his blood to avoid Gonchie's detection. Moreover, Robber 7 didn't change completely all of a sudden. Instead, he quietly changed while Gonchie was fighting with the men in black. Then, when no one was paying attention, he escaped at full speed. The inside of the rope cocoon was wet. Robber 7's sweat and blood were left on it. Hence, Gonchie could sense the scent of Robber 7 there all along. Robber 7 had escaped when no one was paying attention. What do we do now? Mu Fa asked Xiaoxian. Mu Fa, see I do, Chuli Lu Zhai, you guys go back first and follow the team to the royal city, Xiaoxian said. You and Gonchie aren't going back? Are you guys going after that robber? Si Du asked. No, Xiaoxian denied. We're not going after Robber 7. We're going after C. Xiaoxian's answer made Mu Fa's eyebrows twitch. He didn't ask any more questions. Although he was wary of Xiaoxian in the past, it wasn't as deep as it was now. To be able to force C to retreat was far beyond Mu Fa's expectations. At the same time, this also strengthened Mu Fa's resolve and confidence to work with Yanjiao. He was a wise and great leader of the long boat. Everything he did was for the tribe's benefit. He would choose any path that could make the tribe stronger and go further. Obviously, joining the Flaming Horn tribe was indeed a good choice. After Mu Fa and the others left, Gonchie cut open the rope cocoon that Robber 7 was tied up in. He carefully identified the scent inside, not missing a single detail. I was too careless. This was the first time Gonchie encountered such a situation. However, there wouldn't be a next time. If he met Robber 7 again, he wouldn't let Robber 7 use this method to escape. Not long after Xiaoxian and Gonchie left, the sky began to brighten. The sun replaced the moon and shrouded the land. Gradually, there were more and more noises. A group of traders passed by and looked at the scene in front of them cautiously. This wasn't the first time they had taken this route. Even if they couldn't remember every detail of the route, they could still roughly describe what it was like. However, the scene before them was completely different from what they remembered. Sand. Since when was there sand here? Did I remember wrongly? One of the travelers asked hesitantly. I don't remember there being sand here either. You're all right. The leader gripped his sword and walked towards the sand. Although it wasn't sand, it looked as if it had been affected by a natural disaster. It was a ghastly sight. This reminded those who had experienced the disaster of the natural disaster. They couldn't forget the horrible memory, no matter how hard they tried. When they finally stepped onto the sand, the leader kicked something. He used his sword to push the sand away, revealing a dark arrowhead-shaped object. It's Bayan. This was a tool Bayan used to set up a trap. He looked around and found that there were many more of these things. It was definitely Bayan. Who has fought with the buyer here? Why didn't they have the time to collect the items? He looked up into the distance. The trees nearby had already withered. There wasn't a single leaf on the branches. The branches looked as if they would break at the slightest touch. In the distance, although there were still some trees with green leaves, they were more or less yellowed. When the wind blew, many leaves would fall. Taking a deep breath, the leader walked back to the group with wobbly legs. We need to be extra careful on this trip. Don't be careless. The leader's low and stern voice trembled slightly. No matter who Bayan had fought with to create such a situation, it wasn't someone they could afford to mess with. They would avoid them if they could. He was prepared to give up on this trip if he noticed anything amiss. On the other side, Mu Fa and the others caught up with the main group. Xiaoxian and Caesar went after C. He said to ask Caesar to keep an eye on the surroundings at night. Caesar can see things we can't. It's safer. Mu Fa relayed Xiaoxian's instructions to Gigu. The longboat tribe surrounded Mu Fa and asked, Boss, what's the legendary sea like? Is he very powerful? I heard that his knife is very strange. It was made by a long-dead Gongja craftsman. No one else in this world can make it. Mu Fa's expression was complicated. He wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. Chu Li and Si Du were the same. They found it funny and depressing. However, when they thought about it, they felt much better because they were on the same side. Anyway, they weren't enemies. That was good enough. Lu Zhai chased away the people who surrounded them and asked Gigu in a low voice, Do you still have it? Of course, I've been carrying it with me. Gigu opened the animal skin bag containing the chief's bone lock, intending to take out the item. However, as soon as his hand reached in, Gigu's expression froze. He took it out and took out a piece of broken stone. He immediately had a bad feeling. He flipped through the bag. Nothing. He took it out again. There really wasn't anything. Gigu opened the animal skin bag to its fullest and flipped it upside down. He widened his eyes and looked into the bag as if he wanted to skin every inch of it 100 times. However, the truth was that the item in the bag was really gone. One look at Gigu's expression, and Lu Zhai knew what the result was. However, with the precedent of Robber 7 sneaking away under their noses, it wasn't so strange to see Gigu again. They were even surprised that Xiao Xian could predict this. Before we came, Elder Xiao Xian said that if Robber 7 steals the item back, there's no need to look for it, said Lu Zhai. Unfortunately, without the chief's bone lock, they had one less bargaining chip. At the same time, Robber 7 was lying on a tree branch with his legs crossed. He looked proud and praised himself for being so smart. Not only did he manage to escape, he even managed to steal the item back. When he thought about Yan Zhao going to the royal city, Robber 7 decided not to go to the royal city for the time being. That way, he wouldn't meet those Yan Zhao people. Yes, he definitely wouldn't meet any Yan Zhao people. After the hypnosis, Robber 7 started to doze off. He started dreaming about being one of the top 3 robbers. Chapter 824. Chang'e's leader, Su Li, had been rather idle lately. After delivering Yan Zhao's letter, to avoid being treated as a messenger, Su Li quickly left the royal city after delivering the letter to Ji Fong. He even ran quite a distance away. He wanted to go to the royal city to watch the show, but Yan Zhao's team hadn't arrived yet, had they? He'd have to wait for Yan Zhao's team to arrive before heading to the royal city. However, other than Yan Zhao's trip to the royal city, there was nothing else to be happy about. Hence, Su Li was bored out of his wits. He pondered about where he could find some entertainment. Even if there wasn't, he'd create some. Unexpectedly, before he could even move, he sensed someone heading his way at high speed. Su Li's carefree demeanor was gone as he looked in that direction cautiously. Soon, the wariness in his eyes faded and was replaced by intense suspicion. Not long after, a black figure appeared like the wind. It was C. Yo! Su Li was about to greet an old acquaintance when he saw him. It was the usual greeting, but C was like a ferocious beast whose tail had been stepped on. He roared, "Yo, your ancestor?" C didn't stop after his roar. He left like a gust of wind, the air current he stirred up messing up Su Li's unkempt hair. C's roar left Su Li confused. He wanted to ask jokingly, "Old C? Where are you going in such a hurry? Are you chasing after a slave?" However, he only managed to utter a single word before C looked flustered and exasperated. "Angry my ass." But Su Li rubbed his chin thoughtfully as he watched C leave like he was running for his life. Although C ran very fast, he had good eyesight. He could roughly make out C's appearance. When C passed by earlier, he was holding a cross-shaped hilt. Now, it had turned into a vertical pole. If it wasn't for the large she blade with the engravings of an eye, he wouldn't have recognized it as C's iconic cross-shaped hilt she blade. The hilt of the she blade had been chopped off. Was the leader of the number 1 slave organization in trouble? Who could kill C? Just as he was thinking, Su Li sensed that someone was coming from behind. He turned around and his expression froze for a few seconds. Then, he suddenly jumped back and looked at Xiao Xian warily. One of his fingers was already curled, ready to whistle and summon his long-winged bird to escape. Nothing good ever came out of running into Yan Zhao people. "Why are you here?" Su Li continued. "I'm not here to deliver the letter. I have something to do, so I'll take my leave first." As if he was afraid that Xiao Xian would open his mouth, Su Li called the long-winged bird over, jumped onto its back, and sped away like a mouse meeting a cat. "Xiao Xian, I haven't even said a word." Meanwhile, the fleeing C was cursing Xiao Xian 1,000 times in his heart. He was crazy. Wasn't it just because he said something wrong and made a move? He was being chased endlessly. When would these days of being on the run end? It was C's first experience of running from place to place. After the fight that night, C had temporarily given up on the idea of going head-to-head with the Yan Zhao people, who knew that Xiao Xian would chase after him with no intention of giving up. At first, C was still thinking about revenge. However, after days of being chased by Xiao Xian, C changed his mind. He would listen to Ji Fong from now on and stay as far away from Yan Zhao as possible. That way, he wouldn't be chased down by the crazy Yan Zhao people if he accidentally gave the wrong order. After running from place to place, C finally chose to go to the royal city to look for Ji Fong to solve this problem. If he had known that messing with the Yanjiao people would end up in such a sorry state, he would never have sent his men to Yanjiao territory to capture him. Royal City, inside the palace. Jifeng's eyelids twitched. He had a bad feeling about this. After some thought, Jifeng asked the person beside him, judging by the time, Yanjiao should be here soon, right? They'll reach the royal city in 3 days, someone whispered beside Jifeng. Jifeng thought about the deployment he made after receiving Su Li's letter. After the Yanjiao people arrived, the royal city shouldn't be in trouble. 2 more days passed. The atmosphere in the royal city was exceptionally solemn. Although the royal city's atmosphere had been strange ever since the increase of patrols in the royal city, it was nothing compared to today. It was as if the entire royal city's army was on high alert. The citizens of the royal city had a hunch that something big was about to happen a few days ago. However, after 2 days, they saw nothing. Instead, their guesses and discussions intensified. It wasn't that no one said the Yanjiao people were coming, but the reaction of the people of the royal city was different from those of the other cities. What? The Yanjiao people were coming? The Yanjiao person who beat up Lubi and crippled the previous head of the Lu family? He's coming again? Great. Great. There's going to be a good show. After the city gate was destroyed, it took a long time to fix it. Who knew what would happen this time? This was the thought of the royal city's spectators who lacked entertainment. However, the people in the shops and caravans had a different thought. According to the news, the Yanjiao people were a bunch of idiots with a lot of money. Great. When they arrive, they'll make a fortune out of them. Yanjiao's arrival was the hottest topic in the royal city. There were even rumors that Yanjiao was coming to the royal city to settle down. If that happened, the Lu and Fox families would be in trouble. Because of Yanjiao, the royal city's people didn't even care about the Yi family. As for the large and small families in the royal city, they all had different thoughts. The Lu and Fox families were the leaders. Everyone knew that these 2 families had conflicts with Yanjiao. The Linlu and Fox tribes wanted to stop Shaoxian, but were beaten so badly that they couldn't even lift their heads. The royal city's people still remembered the Lu family's head being slapped over the city gate and sent flying over their heads. As for the Fox tribe, they were forced to move into the royal city in the middle of winter. They lacked a bit of confidence and were still unable to gain a foothold in the royal city. No one hated Yanjiao as much as they did. The fall of the Yi family's golden thigh was one disaster after another, causing them to be in an even more difficult situation. That was why when they heard that the flaming horns were coming again, the 2 families came together to discuss this matter. They even bribed the guards at the city gates and sent many people to guard the city gates. It would be best if they could give the flaming horns a show of strength. They didn't know how many people Yanjiao was coming, but they thought that since they had to cross the sea and travel such a long distance to get to the royal city, there wouldn't be many of them. They would be exhausted and unable to fight. It was the perfect time to strike. This time, they planned to use Yanjiao as a stepping stone to show off their strength. I heard that Yanjiao's people will be here today. Luming's eyes were sinister. He still remembered the humiliation from back then. Even now, the black bears would mock them whenever they saw them. I wonder if Yanjiao's Shaoxian will be coming too. Lubi stood there like a bear. With the hammer in his hand, he cast a huge shadow. Back then, Shaoxian had stolen Lubi's hammer in front of everyone and even chased after him. It was a thorn in Lubi's heart. Now he was much stronger than before. His talent was incomparable. Even the boss of the Black Bears, Baimi, didn't want to fight Lubi head-on. In a head-on fight, this talented Lu family prodigy had the upper hand. On the city gate tower, a young man in armor looked into the distance. This type of armor was worn by the leaders of the guards. But if one looked closely, they would see that the sword in his hand had a grain leaf pattern on it. It was the Ji family's emblem. Someone walked up and looked at the Lu family below. He asked the young man in armor, "Are you sure you don't want to tell them the truth?" "No need. They'll know soon enough." The young man didn't even spare the Lu family and Fox people a glance. In the courtyard of the Black Bears, the 2 brothers, Maojin and Maora, were brushing the fur of the bear pulling the cart. The other was playing with the bear with a stick stained with beast blood. The black bear pulling the carriage roared and chased after the wooden stick with its jaws wide open. Although it looked fierce, it was just playing around. Even when Maora hit its nose with the wooden stick, it only shrunk its neck and twitched its ears, growling in protest. "Boss, what do you think Yanjiao is here for?" Maojin asked. Nearby, Baimi shook his head. "I don't know. Do you think Xiao Xian will come? Mao Jin asked again. Probably. As he said that, the black bear that was chasing after the wooden stick paused. The round ears on its head twitched, and it stopped staring at the wooden stick in Maoda's hand. Instead, it stood up in a direction as if it wanted to see something. However, it was surrounded by walls and houses that were taller than it. It could not see further. What's wrong? Maoda waved the stick in his hand. The black bear didn't even look at it. Instead, it looked anxious. He exchanged a look with Mao Jin and immediately threw down the stick and brush in his hand. He leaped onto the roof and looked in the direction of Royal City's gates. Awooh! In the distance a wolf howled. Even though it was far away and Royal City was noisy, the sound still reached their ears. Bamy's expression changed. He had been through a lot. He could tell something from the howl. It's coming from outside the gates. Maoda stood on the roof and craned his neck. He could only see the taller walls on the other side of the gates. There are patrols heading that way. Mao Jin said excitedly. They're here. They must be Yanzhao's men. But what was that howl? Maoda asked. We'll know when we see. Bamy strode out of the courtyard. Maoda and Mao Jin hurried after him. It wasn't just the black bears. There was a commotion all over Royal City. The wolf howl that came from outside the city made many people who were chatting in the city quiet down for a while. Then there was an even louder discussion. Many curious people who liked to watch the show decisively put down what they were doing and rushed to the city gate. The Yi family, those who had been protected by Yi Tuan during the battle with Yi Xiong, and those who had survived the chaos to protect the Yi family all paled. He's here. He's here again. Chapter 825. Gigu looked at the royal city in front of him, deep in thought. The royal city, as expected of the royal city. It was like an ancient giant beast lying there. Even if it didn't make a sound, one could still feel its powerful and majestic aura. It was as if it would swallow everyone and everything that came here in the next moment. There was a sense of urgency in the air that suppressed everything. Those who came here for the first time couldn't help but feel a sense of fear. Because of the slave masters and Zheng Luo's description, Gigu had never liked the people here, especially those from the royal city. He hated them, but he had to admit that the royal city was indeed huge. It was not comparable to the cities they passed by on their way here. There was always a reason to be strong. Logically speaking, as the leader of a tribe, Gigu had to learn from this experience. This is the royal city. There were many people who had the same thought as Gigu. Many of them thought that the Flaming River trading point was already big enough. It was beyond their imagination. It was the biggest trading point they had ever seen in their lives. But now they realized that they did not know how big the world was until they came here. Gigu finally understood why Xiao Xian asked them to come to the royal city. If they didn't come here, many of the Yanzhao people who were already full of themselves would not recognize reality. It was better to let them see it for themselves. Most of the people who came this time were born and raised on the other side of the continent. There was still a gap between them and Zheng Luo's group. They had learned a lot from this trip. Yanzhao was moving too fast. Many people's ambitions could not keep up with their willpower. After they woke up, they still had a long way to go. Can our Flaming River trading point reach this scale in the future? Ao asked. Our Grand Elder said we can, Tuo said confidently. The trading point was in the process of expansion. As the Flaming River Alliance continued to expand, the trading point would continue to expand. Although they also wanted to expand to the size of King City in one go, overestimating themselves would create a feeling of exaggeration. It was better to be solid and steady. The shamans had all said that military force, population, and the will of the people were all things that had to be considered. Even if he could not see that day, he believed that the day of Yanzhao would come. Gigu smirked. That's good. I think so too. With that said, he raised his arm and swung it down. Crackle. In front of the royal city, on the open plains, 6 totem flags were carried forward in a row, fluttering in the wind. Why 6 totem flags? Back then, there were only 3 flags in Chao Chiocheng. Yanzhao's double-horn totem flag, the Flaming River Alliance's dragon flag, and the Longboat tribe's totem flag. But this time, on the way to the royal city, the Hui tribe, Mang tribe, and 8 Limbs tribe had gathered together and thought about it. No matter how they thought about it, they felt that they had lost out. Although not many of their tribes came this time, this was a good opportunity to use Yanzhao's power to make their presence known. It would be a pity to give it up. However, the totem flag was not something that could be easily made. In the end, they thought of a compromise. They would not draw the totem flag in the name of their tribe, but in the name of a small group of people. There would be a difference in the production of the totem flag, but the slave masters and tribesmen here did not understand the rules of the tribes on the other side of the sea. As long as they let others see the totem flag, they would know that people from this tribe had come here before. It would not be in vain for them to come here with the flaming horns. Ta held the Yanjiao totem flag and poked the flagpole into the ground. With a bang, a large amount of dust and grass flew up from the ground. He let go of the flag, and the totem flag quietly stood on the ground. Stretching his arms, Ta and Ao silently communicated with each other. As a team leader who led hunting teams into the forest all year round, Ta could clearly feel the hostility from the city gate. It would not be easy for them to enter the city gate of King City. Was he afraid? Of course not. After stretching his arms, Ta grabbed the flagpole again and pulled it out from the ground. The sound of the totem flag hitting the ground had also brought everyone back to their senses from the shock of seeing King City. However, at this moment, when they saw the totem flag fluttering in the wind, they no longer had any fear in their hearts. Was the royal city scarier than the fearsome beast forest? They were not afraid of the fearsome beast forest, so what was there to be afraid of in the royal city? Plus, they all believed that one day, the flaming river trading point would surpass the royal city. Wherever the two horns pointed, they would succeed. Perhaps it was because of the change in the Yanjiao people's mentality and morale. The other tribesmen also gradually adjusted their mentality. Indeed, what was there to be afraid of? Plus, if anything happened, the Yanjiao people would take the lead. The horn from the city gate sounded after a long howl. The people at the city gate had already begun to move. The royal city guard's armor glowed with a golden light. Seeing this, many people followed their leaders forward while stretching their arms and legs. The swords, axes, and hammers in their hands seemed to be thirsty for blood. Some people even roared excitedly as they moved forward. Looking at their posture, those who didn't know better would think that they were really going to attack the city. Actually, it wasn't just the tribesmen who were shocked by the royal city. The royal city guards were also shocked by these people. Looking at the approaching group, they couldn't help but feel a layer of goosebumps. Even though there were many people in this group who might not be as strong as them in terms of martial prowess, at this moment, in this place, these people seemed to have twisted together into an aura that could sweep away 1,000 soldiers in an instant. On this continent, perhaps only a trained army or a few tribes that lived far away in the mountains could achieve such a feat. This was the advantage of these tribesmen who had just merged with their fire seed. They were united, and the influence of their fire seed was still present. Among the guards at the city gate, Luming looked at the approaching group and gulped. So many people. And where were the others from? Didn't they say only Yanjiao? Why were there so many flags with totems? If they didn't borrow the power of the royal city, with just the Lu family and the Fox people, even if they could win, it would not be easy. The Lu family was still hesitating, but the Fox people were already thinking of retreating. Even though the Yanjiao tribesmen only knew Xiao Xian, they were familiar with Yanjiao's fire seed aura and style. That was why when they saw the numbers, the cunning Fox tribesmen did not want to fight head-on. The Lu family should be the one to deal with the Flaming Horn tribe. It was a difficult task. The armored youth on the city gate tower looked at the approaching group and hesitated. He did not go down to greet them. It wasn't that he didn't dare, he just wanted to observe the situation first. Remembering his brother Jifeng's words, the armored youth searched the approaching group, but did not find the person he was looking for. Where was Yanjiao's Xiao Xian? They said they were here to negotiate with Yanjiao. The most important person was Yanjiao's Xiao Xian. If not for Xiao Xian, Jifeng would not be so afraid of Yanjiao. Just as he was thinking, the cry of an eagle came from the sky. It was not the ones in the sky, but an eagle flying from another direction. It swooped down towards the group heading for the city gate. A figure jumped down from the eagle's back and landed at the front of the group. The armored youth on the city gate tower noticed that when that person appeared, the troops heading towards King City fell silent. Even the roars stopped at the same time. The leaders also looked at that person, as if they were waiting for something. "That's Yanjiao's Xiao Xian," the armored youth asked. "That's him," someone beside the armored youth replied in a low voice. Xiao Xian's appearance lessened the pressure on Gigu and the others. Scanning the group, Xiao Xian looked at the city gate not far away and gestured for them to stop. It was not just the Yanjiao people. The other tribes, including the Longboat and the Mang tribe, stopped as well. None of them objected, and there was no dissatisfaction on their faces. This was not an act. This discovery made the armored youth squint his eyes. He looked at Xiao Xian and pondered. Xiao Xian scanned the royal city gate, and his eyes stopped on Lubi. Although Yanjiao's group exceeded their expectations, Lubi did not care. His target was Xiao Xian, who had just appeared. His eyes were filled with hatred as he stared at Xiao Xian. The muscles on his face were twisted together, making him look ferocious. That day, it was Xiao Xian who stole his hammer in front of everyone and chased after him to beat him up. He was a famous genius of the Lu family in the royal city. Today, he came with a vengeance. No matter what other people thought, Lubi's goal was clear. Revenge. Xiao Xian naturally noticed the intense stares. He did not say anything and walked straight towards Lubi and the others. There was no roar, no release of aura, and no change in the ground beneath his feet. Every step he took brought up a small amount of dust particles. This did not seem like an extremely dangerous, ferocious beast approaching, but more like an ordinary person walking on the ground. However, Lubi, who was facing Xiao Xian, felt as if there was a mountain pressing down on him. He wanted to roar, to release all his strength, to avenge his humiliation. However, he helplessly realized that it was useless. He was like a torch that was about to burn, but the air around him was suddenly sealed. He had nowhere to release his aura, so he had no choice but to hold it back. Lubi, who was standing there with his hammer that could shield him from the sun and rain, had his fierce aura suppressed. He wanted to activate the fire seed's power in his blood, but he realized that the power seemed to be on strike. It was as if it was purposely avoiding something, unwilling to move. How is this possible? Lubi's eyes were filled with disbelief. The hammer in his hand was even bigger than the one Xiao Xian took from the Gongjia family. However, it was only in Lubi's hand now. Lubi's arm trembled, causing the hammer to vibrate weakly. So what if he could not swing the hammer? Many people did not understand why Lubi was behaving like this. Wasn't he the one who wanted to teach Yanjiao's Xiao Xian a lesson a few days ago? Why was Xiao Xian standing right in front of him, and Lubi could not even swing the hammer? No one knew how Lubi felt. His scalp was about to explode. His back was drenched in sweat, and he was terrified. He even wanted to run away. He saw a ball of fire in Xiao Xian's eyes. A ball of white fire. Chapter 8:26. Lubi's tall and sturdy body trembled. His eyes could no longer hide the panic, shock, and fear in them. He wanted to avoid Xiao Xian's gaze, but his legs refused to listen to him. Lubi even thought that if he forced himself to move, he would lose his balance and fall. He didn't need to think too much to know what would happen to him if he fell in front of these tribesmen from the distant continent. Weighing the pros and cons, Lubi chose to grit his teeth and stay put. Noticing Lubi's unusual behavior, the other Lu family members wanted to get closer to see what was going on. However, as soon as they moved, Xiao Xian's gaze fell on them. It was as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over their heads. The Lu family felt their hair stand on end as they met Xiao Xian's gaze. The slightest movement would cause them to shiver. Even though many of them were still far away from Xiao Xian, they could feel an inexplicable shudder that seemed to come from their bones. Or rather, it was a problem with the source of their strength. What was going on? The man on the tower had been watching the commotion below. He could tell that something was wrong. If he continued to watch, the Lu family would be humiliated. Although he did not like the Lu family's style, they were now the guards of the royal city. If they were humiliated, it would be humiliating for the royal city. Especially in front of these tribesmen, he could not afford to mess things up. He thought the Lu family would at least hold on for a little longer. What a pity. Sighing silently, the armored youth jumped down from the tower and landed behind Lubi. Xiao Xian looked over, unsurprised by his appearance. Ji family? Xiao Xian could feel the aura of the Ji family from him. This person looked similar to Ji Fong, but compared to Ji Fong's calmness, this person was more arrogant. However, in front of Xiao Xian, the arrogance on his face lessened, and his eyes became more cautious. Ji Shou of the Ji family is here to welcome you, said Ji Shou. He was the leader of the royal city's guards and one of the few surviving Ji Fong's ascension to the throne. Ji Shou was Ji Fong's biological brother and had contributed greatly to Ji Fong's ascension. As Ji Shou spoke, he met Xiao Xian's eyes and paused. He finally understood why the Lu family members were acting like this. They were under immense pressure. What Ji Shou did not know was that Xiao Xian had restrained himself after Ji Shou's appearance. Due to Ji Feng's appearance, Xiao Xian looked away. The Lu family, including Lubi, felt their bodies lighten as if a mountain had been lifted from their shoulders. Some of them wiped the cold sweat off their foreheads, secretly relieved that Ji Shou had appeared in time or they wouldn't have been able to hold on. These Yanjiao people were really strange. Ji Shou was different from the rest of the Lu family. The power of the fire seed in his body was stronger. After a short pause, he recovered. In the primitive times, the Ji family's fire seed would have been stronger than the Lu family's. Ji Shou could resist Xiao Xian's pressure. They had been stuck at the city gates for a long time. Ji Shou did not waste time and gestured for Xiao Xian to enter. "Open the gates," Ji Shou said. "Everyone, please." Xiao Xian stepped into the city first. Gigu followed behind him with the group. Ji Shou watched the group pass and narrowed his eyes, trying his best to hide the sharpness in them. These tribesmen were indeed different from what he had expected. The results of the Lu family's test meant that he had to treat them seriously. It was rare for him to say please. After all the flaming horns had entered the city, Ji Shou looked at the stunned Lu family with disdain, then at the fox people who were hiding far away. He chuckled and hurried into the city, not caring about the Lu family and the fox people's reactions. The city gates were no longer closed after the Yanjiao group entered the city. Traffic in and out of the royal city resumed. But the Lu family did not have it easy. Thinking of the situation at that time, their hearts were filled with lingering fear, and a chill ran down their spines. Lubi watched in a daze as the group walked away. His grip loosened, and the hammer fell to the ground with a thud. Lubi seemed to have completely collapsed as he struggled to support his body. Luming, who was not far from Lubi, fell to his knees with a thud. They understood Ji Shou's gaze and smile when he left. They were finished. On the other side, the group that had followed Xiao Xian into the royal city walked along the wide road that led directly to the palace. They looked curiously at the royal city troops who were maintaining order on both sides. At the same time, they studied the onlookers, the buildings, and the furnishings of the shops around them. The roads in the royal city were much wider than those in Chaoqiu City. Caesar and his group did not find it crowded at all. Large beasts often walked around the royal city. However, this road was not open to just anyone. Travelers and caravans usually took other routes into the city. Those who walked on this road were given special treatment. "Can you tell?" Gui he asked Tua, who was beside him. "What?" Tua was observing the situation in King City when Gui he suddenly asked such a question. He did not know how to react. The reaction of the people in King City is different from the reaction of the people in the other cities we have seen, Gui he said. Tua thought for a moment. Indeed, the people in the royal city seemed to be looking for entertainment. They were like monkeys in the crowd, watching the Yanjiao group with interest. They were not as guarded as the people in Chaoqiu City. Back then, only a few hundred people had entered Chaoqiu City. Now, all of them had entered the royal city. Even though there were many Yanjiao people, some of the royal city people were shocked at first sight. But they quickly returned to watching the fun. Why? This was the royal city's confidence. This was the royal city's confidence and power. Those who could stay in the royal city were all capable. The fox tribe had been arrogant in the forest back in the day. Even though the tribe had suffered great losses from the king beast incident at the salt mine, at least there were still people in the tribe. Together, they were a powerful force. However, in the royal city, they could not do much. All they could do was suppress the free people or small organizations. The only reason they could be so arrogant until now was because they were riding on the coattails of the Yi family. Once the Yi family fell, the people who had been suppressed by the fox tribe would take revenge. The free people and small organizations in the royal city had nothing to fear. They were not afraid of the Yanjiao group. Plus, even if the Yi family had fallen, there were still the other 5 aristocratic families. What were they afraid of? As the Yanjiao group made their way to the palace, an uninvited guest arrived at the Gongjia residence. "Tell Gongjia Hung to come out." A man dressed in black stood in the great hall, exuding a murderous aura. The current leader of the Gongjia family was Gongjia Hung. Ever since Ji Feng took over, Gongjia Heng's status in the family had skyrocketed. Plus, Gongjia Hung was capable and had just returned from his studies at Gongjia Mountain. After comparing the craftsman's products, the elders of the Gongjia family had acknowledged Gongjia Heng's position. At the same time, this was the best choice for the Gongjia family. Gongjia Hung had been in closed-door cultivation recently. Unless there was an emergency, no one would disturb him. This was not just Gongjia Heng's rule. It was a habit of all the Gongjia family's craftsmen. No one wanted to be disturbed by a trivial matter during their craftsman's work. When it came to crafting, a life-changing inspiration could vanish like smoke in the wind. They might not be able to recall it for the rest of their lives. At this moment, the Gongjia family had an uninvited guest. This was someone the Gongjia family did not want to welcome, but did not dare offend. "Where's Gongjia Hung? Tell him to come out right now." Another suppressed roar caused everyone in the room to tremble. They were afraid, but because of their profession, they couldn't help but glance at the other party's weapon. Those who knew where the weapon came from felt their hearts skip a beat. How did the cross-shaped handle end up like this? The fracture looked strange. If they did not look closely, they would not be able to tell. They were curious, but they did not want to get involved. The person standing in the Gongjia family's great hall was Si, who had been chased all the way here by Xiao Xian. However, Si had changed into a new set of clothes, so he did not look as pathetic. There were not many people who dared to disrespect the Gongjia family like this, and this person was one of them. The Gongjia family and Si had been working together since the Gongjia family's ancestors. Every year, the Gongjia family needed rare materials. Part of it was from this man. After all, Ji had nothing but slaves. He had enough manpower to mine and search for things. Si's cross-shaped shi knife was made by the Gongjia family's craftsman. However, the senior who made it had passed away a long time ago. The craftsman might not be able to replicate the craftsmanship and techniques used. It would be difficult to repair it. The more skilled the Gongjia family's craftsmen were, the more serious their OCD was. If they could not repair the knife perfectly, they would rather not do it. Otherwise, not only would their reputation be damaged, they would also be unhappy for a long time. Si had interacted with many Gongjia family members and knew how they were like. That was why he went straight to Gongjia Hung to ask for an explanation. He knew that some of the Gongjia family members had left after Ji Fong took over. He was here to ask if his cross-shaped shi knife could be repaired. If it continued like this, he would lose face. To avoid people, he snuck into the royal city and went to Ji Fong's place before heading straight to the Gongjia family. His other goal was to find out who in the Gongjia family was the one who forged those threatening weapons for the Flaming Horn tribe. "Where's Hung? Get him out here." Si roared impatiently. "What are you yelling for?" Hung was not without a temper after being interrupted in the middle of his work. However, the moment he entered, he saw the shi knife in Si's hand. His eyes were glued to it. "Your knife, let me see." Chapter 8:27. Seeing that Hung had finally come out, Si did not waste any time. He tossed the shi blade he had shaved into a stick at Hung. The shi blade was still quite heavy. Although it had been shaved, it was still heavy for a regular person. However, as a blacksmith, Heng's arm strength was incomparable to a regular person's. After catching the shi blade firmly, he did not even look at Si as he studied it carefully. The other Gongjia family members did not care anymore. They all gathered around to study the shi blade's fracture. The people who were still in the hall were all people of some status in the family. They were Heng's trusted aides, so Si was not afraid of them spreading rumors. He allowed them to study it. This fracture. Hung rubbed his finger back and forth, carefully feeling the surface of the fracture. His eyes did not miss a single detail. To be able to create such a fracture, the other party's weapon must be very sharp and hard. The force of the blow must have been very strong too. Most importantly, he did not know what material it was made of. From the fracture, Hung could tell that the weapon used to break the handle was not a material he was familiar with. This piqued Heng's curiosity. He asked Si, "Tell me about what happened." Si refused to recall what happened. He would not describe how Xiao Xian had shaved him to the Gongjia family. He could not wait to hide this embarrassing incident. How could he tell anyone? "It's fine if you don't want to talk. Tell me what the weapon looks like." Hung thought back to all the weapons he had encountered. None of them could create a fracture like this. The marks on it were very unfamiliar. "You don't know?" Si glanced at Hung and the other blacksmiths with a strange expression. He really could not describe what Xiao Xian's blade looked like. "It's a blade. I didn't notice it at the time, but I know it has the Gongjia family's cloud pattern on it. There's no mistaking it." Among the Gongjia family members who left, who went to Yanjiao. "Yanjiao? The one who broke the shi blade was Xiao Xian from Yanjiao?" asked Hung. "Yes, you know Xiao Xian?" Right, I heard that Xiao Xian from Yanjiao once came to Royal City and asked you to make him a sword. Did you make that kid's sword too? Si raised his voice, glaring at Hung as if he wanted to eat him alive. Gongjia Hung did not mind Si's fierce glare. He frowned and shook his head. No, although I've given Yanjiao some swords and axes, only the sword I gave to Xiao Xian is the best. The rest can't even cut through the hilt of your Shi sword. Those swords and axes aside, even the sword I gave to Xiao Xian might not be able to make such a cut. Then who in the Gongjia family made Yanjiao's sword? Si was in a bad mood. Could it be? An older man next to him hesitated. Gongjia Ren. When Ji Fong took the throne, a portion of the Gongjia family members left, including Gongjia Ren. Others did not know where Gongjia Ren went, but Heng's trusted aides knew. Gongjia Ren and a few others were sent to Yanjiao for protection. Hung naturally thought of that too, but thought it was impossible. How long had it been since Gongjia Ren left? Plus, Gongjia Ren had never been to Xia Valley to receive his ancestors' inheritance. Even if Gongjia Ren was talented, there were many talented people in the Gongjia family. So how did Gongjia Ren make these weapons? Just as the Gongjia family members were guessing who made Xiao Xian's sword, Yanjiao's team arrived at the palace. Of course, not everyone entered the palace. Xiao Xian led 200 people into the palace while the rest stayed outside. Ji Fong had already arranged a place for everyone to stay. The last time Xiao Xian saw Ji Fong, he was still the second son of the king and kept a low profile. Now that they met again, Ji Fong exuded a noble aura. Although Ji Fong did not go to the city gates to welcome them, he sent his younger brother and himself to the palace gates to welcome them as a sign of respect. Long time no see. Ji Fong had a smile on his face. His clothes were luxurious with exquisite embroidery, and he exuded an indescribable aura of nobility. His every move exuded the authority of a superior. Xiao Xian's aura was clearly different from Ji Fong's. Although he did not exude a noble aura like Ji Fong's, he had a Yanjiao aura. Those who could follow Xiao Xian into the palace were the leaders and elites of the Flaming River tribes. No matter what they thought or how nervous they were, they could not appear weak in front of these noble slave masters. Ji Fong had already ordered his men to prepare a feast, but it was still early at night. Ji Fong did not give Xiao Xian time to ask about Si. He immediately ordered his men to bring all the missing people from the Flaming River Valley here. Ji Fong was not lying. No matter how they were tortured, they were treated well in the royal city. At least they were brought to Xiao Xian, and the rest in high spirits. Ji Fong was about to tell them about the special treatment the slaves received in the royal city when his gaze swept past them. He paused, forgetting what he was about to say. He saw a person, and that person should not have appeared among those who were captured. He had never seen this person before. Ji Fong's expression darkened. Although he wanted to grab the guards in charge of the captured tribesmen, it was bad enough that Robber 7 was here, but now there was a tribesman among them, and no one knew. But now was not a good time to be lecturing. Ji Fong could only suppress his anger, and his expression was ugly. The guard wanted to explain, but when he met Ji Fong's gaze, he could only lower his head. Gigu ordered Chu Li and the rest to bring the captured tribesmen back to their teams to check if there were any missing people. When he saw Gan Xie walk out with the captured people, he was stunned. When he saw that Xiao Xian did not look surprised, he knew that Xiao Xian must have asked Gan Xie to check on the captured people. After checking on the captured people, there were no missing people and no life-threatening injuries. Chu Li and the rest relaxed. He could go back and report to his tribesmen. This risky trip was not in vain. Let's talk about the contract. How do we sign it? Asked Xiao Xian. Ji Fong did not expect Xiao Xian to not mention Si. When he heard the haggard Si's words, he deduced that Xiao Xian must have known that he was working with Si. He thought that Xiao Xian would question him after bringing his men over, or even use this as an opportunity to ask for more conditions. Who would have thought that Xiao Xian would skip over Si and ask about the contract? Since Xiao Xian did not mention it, Ji Fong would not bring it up either. There are many ways to sign a contract, but we usually choose two. One is a spiritual contract, and the other is a written contract. Both are based on the fire seed. Ji Fong explained the difference between the two contracts to Xiao Xian. A written contract was to record the contents of the contract in words, and then use the power of the fire seed to draw a totem mark to prove the signer's identity. However, a written contract was not that strong. Some people would disregard their reputation and go back on their word. There was nothing you could do about it. No matter how much you scolded them, they would not lose anything. However, a spiritual contract was different. A spiritual contract requires a mark on the heaven and earth contract book. Ji Fong looked at the center of the palace. It was not a place anyone could enter. Heaven and earth contract book? That's right. The heaven and earth contract book is connected to the fire seed. It cannot be changed easily, even if you are the king. The smile on Ji Fong's face was replaced by a solemn expression. When the heaven and earth contract book was mentioned, everyone would be in awe, including himself. If you choose the heaven and earth contract book, I will bring you there. If you choose the written contract, we can start discussing the contents now, said Ji Fong. Heaven and earth contract book. Xiao Xian looked at the center of the palace. I choose the heaven and earth contract book. Gigu and the rest had no objections to Xiao Xian's choice. They could tell that the only person Ji Fong valued was Xiao Xian. Coincidentally, they followed Xiao Xian's decision. News of Yanjiao choosing the heaven and earth contract book soon spread outside the palace. What? Those tribesmen chose the heaven and earth contract book. Oh. Heaven and earth contract book? Did I hear wrong? Really? Definitely, it came from the nobles. The royal city's spectators exploded. Yanjiao's tribesmen had chosen the heaven and earth contract book method. Most of them had never seen what a heaven and earth contract book looked like. Other than the nobles in the royal city, only the leaders of large caravans and tribes had seen it. Although the passers-by had not seen it with their own eyes, they had heard of it. Place your bets. Place your bets. The gambling house was the first to react. They started shouting and putting up a large sign. Someone beat a drum to attract attention. Everyone, guess how big of a mark Yanjiao will leave on the heaven and earth contract book. Why don't you come in and place your bets? Whoosh! The royal city spectators, who were curious and eager to watch the show, were now itching for a bet. The older people knew how the heaven and earth contract book was bet, but the younger people did not know why and fought to ask. The gambling house's people looked pleased. They enjoyed the feeling of being surrounded by people, and also enjoyed the requests of the ignorant people. Moreover, the more people there were, the more they earned. The person beating the drum stopped and cleared his throat. He was about to explain in detail to these ignorant juniors. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to open his mouth, someone suddenly jumped out and slammed something on the table in front of him. Bet a crystal. The gambling house's people's eyes flashed coldly. They looked across the table at the person who interrupted them. However, before they could take a closer look, their eyes were attracted by the thing on the table. A crystal as thick as an arm was slammed on the table, pressing down on the spot where the words Yanjiao were written in red. The crowd instantly fell silent. Then they all looked at the person who pressed down on the big crystal, as if they were looking at an idiot. Chapter 828. Because of the core seed, gemstones were extremely rare here. That was why the people here, whether they were nobles, slave masters, or tribesmen who lived far away from the city, loved gemstones very much. The rarer something was, the more precious it was. The better the quality of life, the more people who didn't have to worry about food and clothing, the more they liked beautiful and rare gemstones. A long time ago, there were no gambling houses in the royal city. The so-called gambling houses were just games for some bored people to pass the time. Occasionally, they would place bets because of some fights. Later, there were more and more organizations. Some of them saw the business opportunities in gambling and joined forces to set up gambling houses. Their purpose was not to pass the time, but to make a profit. The gambling house in the royal city was the largest in the city. It was called Fubo. Fubo was probably the most famous gambling house on the mainland. After all, it was based in the royal city. Although other gambling houses had some scale, because they were set up later than Fubo, they were not as famous as Fubo. In terms of strength, there was also a gap. Many gambling houses that were gradually rising wanted to enter the royal city. After all, the royal city was the richest place on the mainland. If a gambling house was set up in the royal city, the profits would definitely be huge. However, because of Fubo, they were unable to establish themselves in the royal city. Ever since Fubo was set up, they would set up gambling houses every day. There were various kinds of gambling houses. Through various forms of winning and losing, they attracted gamblers and accumulated wealth. If it was a large-scale gambling house, someone would inform them. People from all over the royal city would hear about it and come over. This time, it was like that. The sound of the drums told the people in the city that there was a big event, and they could start gambling. However, even if they were mentally prepared, no one would have thought that this would happen. Therefore, when this crystal as thick as an arm was thrown out, some people's eyes widened. This was too ruthless. Such a big crystal. How precious was it? Just like that, it was thrown on the gambling table. Wouldn't it be heartbreaking to lose it? If it were them, they would be heartbroken for half their lives. Usually, they would gamble just to pass the time and use a little money to play. Everyone had different goals. Some people were really bored and wanted to pass the time. Some were just following the trend to join in the fun. There were also some who wanted to inquire about some information or get familiar with others through gambling. Of course, there were also some people who were addicted to gambling and would take out more money. The people in the gambling house had also seen some noble children throw away a lot of money, betting with precious things and so on. However, they had never seen such a large crystal. The sunlight was refracted into 7 colors by this pure and translucent crystal. When it shone on the table, some people almost forgot to breathe. This, not to mention the onlookers, even Fubo's people were dumbfounded at this time. Some people wanted to touch the crystal, but their fingers were trembling, afraid that they would accidentally destroy it. Abuli, how can you place? How can you place? The drumming and Pu tribesmen came up from behind. People from other tribes also heard the commotion and came over. They did not follow Xiao Xian into the palace this time. Most of the people who entered the palace were Yanjiao people and the tribes who had lost a lot of people. These people who were placed outside the palace had nothing to do anyway, so they decided to go around the royal city to broaden their horizons. They also wanted to see if there were any souvenirs. If they liked something, they would buy it. It was rare for them to come here. They had just started walking around when they heard about the gambling house. There were often gambling houses in the Flaming River trading point, so they had seen them before. There were pictures drawn on the gambling table, and one of them was Yanjiao's 2-horned totem. Before they could ask, Abuli rushed over. Ever since he came here, Abuli had become a tycoon. The feeling of being able to buy a lot of things with a wave of his hand was amazing. Because he had the support of the other tribes in the Flaming River Alliance, Abuli began to flaunt his wealth. Abuli was just flaunting his wealth too much, so he slapped the table in excitement. Now that everyone looked at him like he was an idiot, he came back to his senses. This was not the Flaming River trading point. The rules were different, and the way of playing might be different too. He didn't even know what the Heaven and Earth Agreement book was. After he woke up, Abuli regretted it immediately. He had been too complacent this time and had lost his composure as the chief of a tribe. What's the Heaven and Earth contract? A Longboat tribe member asked. At this time, the people in the gambling house did not mind that they did not know anything. It was easier to scam them if they didn't know anything. The Heaven and Earth contract is a way to sign a contract. Tribes who sign a contract with the royal city will leave their mark on the Heaven and Earth contract. Different people can leave different marks on the Heaven and Earth contract too. Do you see these on the table? These are the rankings of the 6 noble families of the royal city based on the size of their marks on the Heaven and Earth contract. This was also the original ranking of the 6 noble families in the royal city. The people in the gambling house did not say the second half of the sentence because this was only the ranking of the 6 noble families of the royal city in the past. Now many things had changed. For example, the E family, who was ranked second in terms of the size of their marks on the Heaven and Earth contract, was now half crippled. To put it simply, the stronger the person, the bigger the mark they can leave on the Heaven and Earth contract. The explanation was simple and easy to understand. Abuli looked at the 7 big sections on the table and understood a little. The people in the gambling house continued to explain to them how the game was played. They divided the table into 7 sections. The 6 noble families of the royal city, Ji, Yi, Mu, Feng, Chao, and Un, had their surnames written. There was an empty section behind each section. Other than these 6 sections, there was another empty section at the side with Yanjiao written on it. Every empty section was a place to place a bet. The gambler would bet on whichever section they thought that Yanjiao could leave more marks than them. If they could not leave more marks than any of them, they would bet on the last section. If they could leave more marks than all of them, they would bet on another section with Yanjiao written on it. The section that Abuli had bet on earlier meant that he had bet on Yanjiao surpassing the 6 noble families of the royal city. That section was a section that no gambler in the royal city would bet on. This was also why everyone looked at Abuli as if he was an idiot. There was actually someone who thought that Yen Jiao could surpass the royal Ji family. This was the funniest joke they had seen all day. To be precise, the size of the mark on the heaven and earth contract was not directly related to one's strength. However, until now, there had never been a case where the mark on the heaven and earth contract exceeded that of the Ji family. In fact, there had never been a case where the mark on the heaven and earth contract exceeded that of the Yi family. The people in the gambling house were explaining things a little too quickly. Abuli could not understand everything, but the results of his cramming along the way allowed him to get a rough idea of what was going on. So you don't know the rules. Why don't you place a new bet? Someone from the royal city advised. It was not that they were kindly reminding him, but they wanted to see the disappointed faces of the people in the gambling house. If that large crystal had been placed in the empty section, then it would have belonged to the gambling house and could not be taken back. How could they win something that was impossible? Yeah, let's place a new bet. I think we should bet on the Chao family. I think it's better to bet on the Yin family. Don't you remember how Yen Jiao sent the head of the Lu family flying with one slap? I think it's better to bet on the Feng family. Who knows, maybe Yen Jiao can surpass the Chao family and the Yin family. Those who wanted to watch the show started to jeer. The faces of the people in the gambling house alternated between green and white. They were so angry that their veins were throbbing. They wanted nothing more than to shut these people up. What's going on? A low voice rang out from the gambling house. It was not loud, but it seemed to suppress all the jeering. The crowd fell silent again. Abuli looked over and saw a middle-aged man with a long beard walking out of the gambling house. Even the silk robe he was wearing could not hide his ferocious aura. There was a large scar on one side of his face. However, the scar on the other side of his face was painted with the face of a ferocious beast, making him look even more eerie. The person who hit the drum saw this and was slightly taken aback. He stepped back and made way for the middle-aged man. "Boss, it's like this." Someone from the gambling house came over to explain the situation. The middle-aged man looked at the crystal on the gambling table. His eyes flashed. After all, he was the leader. Although he was excited, he maintained a steady and calm expression. He walked to the gambling table and sized up Abuli's group. He said, "I am Bo Yi, the leader of Fu Bo. They have already explained the rules of the Heaven and Earth Contract Book bet." Abuli looked at Bo Yi's long beard that parted when he spoke. He did not pay attention to what the other party was saying and let out a confused "ah." Foolish people are easy to trick. This was Bo Yi's first impression of Abuli. Without waiting for Abuli to speak, Bo Yi continued, "How about this? You all came from afar, so it's understandable that you don't know the rules here. Even some of the young people in the royal city might not know how to bet on the Heaven and Earth contract. You should all understand now, right? How about we place a new bet?" He purposely spoke slowly and loudly, but every word was emphasized clearly. Everyone present could hear him clearly. "Boss!" The people beside him wanted to persuade him, but Bo Yi raised his hand to stop them. Bo Yi did not look at the people in the gambling house who were scratching their heads. His eyes were fixed on Abuli's group. "How do you choose? Or do you choose to believe in Yen Jiao?" He purposely changed the topic. Believing in Yen Jiao did not necessarily mean that Yen Jiao would surpass the 6 tribes of the royal city. It did not mean that they had to keep their wealth. But at a time like this, how would these unfamiliar tribesmen choose? Of course we choose to believe in Yen Jiao. Abuli had no intention of taking back the crystal. Bo Yi's lips curled. Just as he expected. They were going to get this crystal. Bo Yi looked away from Abuli and turned to the people around him. "Do you all want to play too?" The drumming tribes Qing Yi and the Pu tribes looked at each other. They both took out the water moonstones that they originally planned to buy, and they even took out bags of them. Like Abuli, "I'll bet on Yen Jiao." Zhui threw out his bag. Bam! A bag of water moonstones was thrown at the spot with Yen Jiao written on it. The bag was wide open, allowing everyone to see the stones inside. Because there were already people coming and going between the 2 continents, the Longboat tribe sold some water moonstones here at a high price. As people from the royal city, they had seen water moonstones before. Plus, the people of the royal city thought water moonstones were more valuable than crystals. They had never seen so many at once. There were at least 20 pieces in this bag, right? Bo Yi's fingers trembled. He covered the top of the bag with his arm. Even though he only blocked a small part of the light, they could still see the light from the water moonstones. These were high-quality water moonstones, Not those low-quality ones that gave off a dim light and had impurities. Bo Yi's heart raced. Hiss, someone in the crowd gasped. Another big spender. Me too, Qingyi said. Bam! An even bigger bag of water moonstones was thrown at the spot with Yanjiao written on it. Bo Yi inspected the goods. This bag of water moonstones was of a higher quality than the previous one. Oh, the crowd cheered even louder. Bo Gu of the Gu tribe did not say a word. He opened his animal skin bag and placed the bag of ground ice stones there. A few high-quality ground ice stones rolled out of the bag. Under the light from Yangguang, they looked like the eyes of a beast staring at the crowd. Looking at them from different angles, it felt like the beast's eyes were moving. Wow! The crowd cheered even louder. They were all big spenders. The other tribesmen from the Longboat tribe didn't stay idle either. They all took out their belongings and placed them in the same spot. Bags of jades, crystals, and magnificent gems dazzled the people around the gambling house. Their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Their shouts grew louder and louder, and the people in the back were numb. However, the shouts did not die down, and the excitement of the crowd did not diminish at all. Instead, the shouts became louder as more and more onlookers joined in. It seemed that only by shouting could they vent their excitement. Gulp! Someone swallowed his saliva, and more people around him followed suit. Some of them even wiped the saliva that flowed out. They could not be blamed for their reactions. Even though they were born in the capital or often came to the capital for trade and claimed to be knowledgeable, this was the first time in their lives that they had seen so many gems of such high quality. Even the Ji family rarely took out so many gems at once. Crazy, these tribesmen from the other side of the sea were all crazy. Bo Yi was so excited his face turned red. These gems were all theirs. All of them. The number of people beating the drums increased from 1 to 5. The drums were also changed to a bigger model. With 5 people beating the drums at the same time, it was as if they were going to break the drums. The people nearby felt as if thunder was rumbling in their ears. The rumbling of the drums could be heard by the entire royal city. More and more people came to the gambling den and placed their bets. However, no one in the royal city touched the Yanjiao section. Of course, they had to participate in a bet like this where the results could be predicted. They were here to make money, not lose money. Bo Yi looked at the increasing amount of valuables on the table. He started calculating the odds of each section based on the value of the items. He was calculating how they could make the most out of it. Chapter 829. The tribesmen who came over put up their own gemstones. Those who didn't have any gemstones were persuaded by the gambling house to put up their weapons, but they refused. Tribesmen could live without gems, but they couldn't live without weapons. Otherwise, what would they use to fight if a war broke out? Those gems? Bo Yi thought it was a pity. He heard from his sources that the Flaming Horns had many good quality weapons. He wanted to trick them into giving him their weapons, but he didn't expect these tribesmen to be so cautious and stubborn. They wouldn't give in no matter what he said. Although it was a pity, looking at the mountain of gems on the table, Bo Yi was excited again. They were rich. This was a huge haul. As the number of participants increased, Bo Yi quickly came up with the best plan for himself. Those who bet that the Flaming Horn tribe would surpass the 6 tribes of King City had odds of 1 to 5. The other 6 bets were either 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. The odds here were all rounded. The lowest bet was only 1 to 2. Once the proposal was out, the number of people placing their bets increased. Some of the older gamblers had used Bo Yi's proposal as a basis to place their bets. They were worried that there might be a trap. Now that the proposal was out, they felt more at ease. However, most of them chose the last few bets. Very few people placed their bets behind the Ji and Yi family. This meant that the people of Royal City didn't think Yanjiao would win. Even if Yanjiao sent the Liu family's previous head flying with a slap, it didn't prove anything. The Ji and Yi family of Royal City had a special place in Royal City's hearts. Only 1 to 5? I thought it would be 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, someone mumbled. More than one person thought so. Even Bo Yi had planned to do so at first but quickly rejected it. First, these tribesmen had just arrived in Royal City. Bo Yi didn't know how the 6 tribes of Royal City felt about them, so he didn't dare to make his bet too obvious. He wanted to do something like 1 to 11 to 100 to attract more bets, so they could earn more. But he was worried that if he made it too obvious, these tribesmen with bad tempers would cause a ruckus. If chaos ensued, they would be the ones to take the blame. The gains would not make up for the losses. 1. 5 was just right. It didn't sound too different from the others. Why was it that there were so many gambling houses, but only Fubo could establish a foothold here? On one hand, Fubo was established early and had great strength. On the other hand, Fubo knew how to read people's faces and try to figure out the intentions of the nobles in the royal city. When it was time to do good, he should be firm. Besides, he had to give these tribesmen face and not make things too ugly. That way, he would be able to extort more money from them later on. Bowie thought. When Bowie told them the compensation, the people at the gambling den did not think much of it. No matter how much the flaming horn bet was, whatever they bet would still belong to them. Inside the palace, Xiao Xian was being led to where the Heaven and Earth Agreement book was. He saw Jifang's sword. The sword was not out of its scabbard, but he could feel the cold light hidden within. This must be the sword that Jifang used his blood to forge and used to ascend to the throne. Noticing Xiao Xian's interest in his sword, Jifang smiled. "Let's spar after we sign the contract." "All right," Xiao Xian replied. Just then, a Yanjiao warrior came over. He was originally waiting outside the palace, but rushed in because of the gambling house incident. He told Xiao Xian about what happened outside. "Grand Elder, everyone outside is talking about it." The warrior was displeased because the people outside were looking down on Yanjiao. They thought they were all rich idiots. Xiao Xian thought about it, but did not answer directly. Instead, he said, "When you leave the palace, let Gan Xie go with you. He doesn't want to stay in the palace." During the hunt for C, Gan Xie did not travel with Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian let him check on the captured people first. However, after Gan Xie returned, he told Xiao Xian that there was a fire seed's aura in the palace that he did not like. He felt uncomfortable staying in the palace for too long and wanted to leave. After the Yanjiao warrior left, Jifang continued leading Xiao Xian and the others towards the Heaven and Earth Agreement book. He knew about the gambling house but didn't care. "It's right in front." Jifang slowed down, his expression turning serious. Gigu and Ao could feel the strong fire seed's aura. They had sensed it when they first entered the palace, but now that they were closer, the feeling was even stronger. There was no sense of rejection from a foreign tribe's fire seed. The fire seed's aura seemed to be controlled in a very small area, like a sleeping person, its presence reduced. "There's a fire seed inside?" Gigu looked over in surprise. Because of the high walls, he could not see what was going on inside. The people here had long ceased to exist as tribes. The primitive fire seeds of each tribe had been merged into the bodies of their members and passed down through their bloodlines. Then, what was the fire seed's aura inside? It was definitely a primitive fire seed. But why didn't it reject them? Jifang smiled mysteriously, but did not explain. "You'll know once you go in." The security was tight, so Jifang did not plan to bring too many people in. Only Xiao Xian, Gigu, Ao, and Ta were allowed in. He wanted to sign a contract with Yanjiao. It had nothing to do with the other tribes, so he would not let them in, even if they were part of the Flaming River Alliance. Jifang only cared about Yanjiao. More accurately, the only person he was wary of was Xiao Xian. Rumble, the heavy metal door was pushed open. Jifang went in first. Xiao Xian and the rest scanned their surroundings before walking in. Other than Jifang, there were 5 other people inside. They were from the other 5 families of the royal city. The Yi family's representative was not Yi Tuan. Instead, it was an old man Xiao Xian had never seen before. This person had not participated in the battle between the Yi family and Yi Xiong. Unlike the arrogant Yi family members, this old man was very low-key. Compared to the people from the other 4 families, he did not have much of a presence. When Xiao Xian looked over, the old man's head was slightly lowered, his eyelids drooping. He did not meet Xiao Xian's gaze. After looking at the old man, Xiao Xian noticed the stone mountain in the middle of the yard. The yard was very large and filled with many flowers and trees. It looked like a well-tended garden. The stone mountain in the middle looked like a fake mountain used to decorate the garden. Its purpose seemed to be to create scenery. However, no one who entered this courtyard would ignore it because the strong aura of the fire seed was emitted from it. It was the main body of the yard. There was a huge amount of power hidden inside. Stepping into the yard, the fire seed aura grew stronger. Even the slowest person could feel it. However, just as Gui He and the others had sensed before, the aura of the fire seed from this mountain was only limited to a small area. Outside this area, it was very difficult to sense it. Other places in the palace might not be able to sense this aura, let alone people outside the palace. It was no wonder that they did not know when they first entered the city, because they could not sense the aura of the fire seed. Xiao Xian looked at the mountain. It was like a miniature mountain, very similar to the steep cliffs in the forest. The highest point of the mountain was almost 20 meters above the ground. It was almost 100 meters long and formed the shape of the letter 1. One side of the mountain was steep while the other side was like a cliff, like a mountain wall. On the other side of the cliff, Xiao Xian saw some totemic patterns. Other than the Ji family, there were also the emblems of the other 5 families in the royal city. There were also some from other tribes and organizations. Xiao Xian saw the symbol of the Black Bear Caravan. These were all signs of a contract with the Ji family. The size and depth of the totemic patterns were different. The lighter the pattern, the older it was. The pattern of the Black Bear Caravan was lighter. The previous leader of the Black Bear Caravan must have made a contract with the Ji family. Of course, the Ji family would not allow a caravan without a contract to grow in the royal city. As for the size of the totemic patterns, Xiao Xian took a look. The 6 noble families in the royal city had the largest totemic patterns, especially the Ji family and the Yi family. They were obviously larger than the others, but the difference between the 2 families was not obvious. In fact, the Ji family was only slightly larger than the Yi family. Could this be the heaven and earth contract? Gigu asked uncertainly. Yes, it is. Ji Fong stood in front of the mountain, looking at the large and small totemic patterns on it. His heart swelled with pride again. There was a reason why the royal city was located here. In the beginning, the ancestors of the Ji family chose this place because they thought that if they were faced with an invincible enemy, be it human or beast, the Ji family could use the Heaven and Earth Contract book's power to make a last stand when there was no way out. Why did the Ji family suppress the other families to become the dominant family in the royal city? Strength was one reason, but there was another. Back then, only the Ji family could gain the recognition of the mountain. Even the Yi family, who always thought their fire seed was the strongest, could not do it. According to the records left behind by the Ji family's ancestors, it was their blood that awakened the mountain. This mountain only recognized members of the Ji family, and only those with a strong enough royal bloodline in the Ji family. It did not recognize the weak. Another unknown reason why Ji Fong was able to succeed was that he had gained the recognition of the mountain. Without the royal bloodline of the Ji family, no one could leave a mark on the mountain. Yes, not a single mark. Even if the Gongjia family's sharp swords left a mark on the mountain, it would disappear very quickly, as if the mountain had erased it. This was why Ji Fong said that once a contract was signed on the Heaven and Earth contract, it could not be changed. Gui He and the others looked up at the mountain in front of them. This mountain wall was more like a totem wall carved with all kinds of totems. Inside it was a primitive fire seed that did not belong to any tribe, person, or beast. They had always thought that the Heaven and Earth contract was made from animal skin, cloth, or plants, similar to the animal skin rolls they used. They did not expect the Heaven and Earth contract to be a mountain. There was a primitive fire seed attached to it. From a certain point of view, this mountain was alive. Chapter 830. Xiao Xian could feel the power of the fire seed flowing within the mountain. However, just like humans, the totemic warriors who were not in battle usually did not display their powers. Similarly, this mountain was the same. Judging from its appearance, there was nothing special about this mountain other than the fact that there were no plants growing on it. Do we sign the contract now? Xiao Xian asked. If you want, we can do it now. You've already seen the contract. If you don't object, we can sign it now, said Ji Fong. To keep Yanjiao in check, Ji Fong had offered very good terms. Everyone had to interact peacefully and not fight. They had to abide by each other's rules when they were in each other's territory. The time limit was 100 years. Royal City needed to expand and deal with internal and external matters. The same was true for Yanjiao. They needed time to develop. This was beneficial to both sides. 100 years sounded like a long time, but in reality, it was less than half the lifespan of many tribesmen. If Ji Fong could hold the throne for 100 years, it was not impossible for him to sit on the throne for 100 years. Moreover, even if Ji Fong was no longer around after 100 years, the contract would still be in effect. The successor would continue to abide by it. Just like the contract signed between the Black Bears and Royal City. It was still in effect. No matter who became the leader of the Black Bears, They would abide by the contract until it expired. Xiao Xian looked at Gigu and the others. Seeing that they had no objections, he nodded. Then let's sign the contract now. Ji Fong passed a scroll made of animal skin to Xiao Xian and the others. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he took the scroll and walked to the mountain wall. He paced back and forth and stopped at a spot. Pointing at the wall, he said to Xiao Xian, "There's more space here. Let's sign it here." When Xiao Xian nodded, Ji Fong's expression turned solemn. He raised his right hand and with a shake, his palm split open. Blood flowed out. Before the blood dripped, Ji Fong had already pressed his bleeding palm against the mountain wall. At the same time, some veins appeared on his body. Xiao Xian had seen those veins on Jiju before. The fire seed of the Ji family radiated from Ji Fong. A ball of fire appeared on his palm. At the same time, Ji Fong began to recite the contents of the contract. With every word he recited, a portion of the totem pattern on his palm was completed. When the 1-meter-long totem pattern was completely formed, the content of the contract was almost finished. For a period of 100 years. As the last word was spoken, a ring of red light appeared around the Ji family's totem. It was the fire seed of the mountain. This circle of flames surrounded the totem mark left behind by Ji Fong. Ji Fong retracted his hand. The totem mark on the mountain wall was still there, and so was the circle of red flames. Taking 2 steps back, Ji Fong gestured for Xiao Xian to come forward. "You just need to leave your imprint at the side." Xiao Xian nodded. He walked forward and pressed his hand against the mountain wall, right beside the Ji family's totem mark. The moment Xiao Xian's hand touched the wall, the red flames around the Ji family's totem mark extended towards him. Xiao Xian closed his eyes. He could feel the flow of energy within the mountain and the fire seed in the heart of the mountain. Perhaps others would find the fire seed in the mountain unfamiliar. Even if it did not show any strong resistance, it would still give off a certain amount of pressure. The closer one was to it, the more uncomfortable the pressure would be. However, Xiao Xian was different. He did not feel the pressure from the mountain's fire seed. He felt that the fire seed inside was familiar, similar to the white flames inside his body. Other than that, the contract was a manifestation of the fire seed's power. Xiao Xian could feel every bit of energy flowing through his palm. Opening his eyes, a white flame appeared in Xiao Xian's eyes. The totem mark on his body spread rapidly. The power of the Yanjiao fire seed in his blood surged towards his palm. The aura of the Yanjiao fire seed spread outwards. Outside the palace, the gambling den had received news from a few aristocrats that Yanjiao was about to sign a contract with the royal city. Hence, the people gathered there did not leave. To prevent anyone from stealing from the gambling table, Bowie sent many people over. They surrounded the gambling table in 3 layers. Everyone looked around like they were guarding against thieves. Those who wanted to place their bets would place their bets through the only gap left. When they felt the movement of the fire seed from the palace, they knew that the contract had begun. "It's the aura of the Yanjiao fire seed," Abuli said. "Guess who's in charge of signing the contract on Yanjiao's side?" someone asked. "Do you even need to ask?" Everyone looked at the person who asked the question like he was an idiot. "Yes, do you even need to ask?" The person in charge of signing the contract on Yanjiao's side must be their first elder, Xiao Xian. The entire royal city seemed to be shocked by this sudden change. Everyone around the gambling den stared nervously at the palace, carefully sensing the movement of the fire seed's power. Although they could not see what was going on, they could guess from the changes in the fire seed's power. In a house not far from the gambling house, Su Li and the dozens of Changles who had rushed over to watch the show were also paying attention to the happenings in the palace. At the same time, they were also keeping an eye on the gambling house. Watching a commotion was important. When necessary, they would still find some entertainment. They were the best at taking advantage of the chaos. Inside the palace, in the garden where the Heaven and Earth contract book was, Ji Fong sensed the Yanjiao fire seed aura emanating from Xiao Xian's body and frowned. Xiao Xian's fire seed aura was becoming strange. There seemed to be something else in it. It was not just the Yanjiao fire seed aura. What was it? Ji Fong's pearl twitched. He looked at the mountain wall, then at Xiao Xian. He was suspicious. According to convention, Yanjiao's totemic mark should have appeared. But why was there no sign of Yanjiao's horns under Xiao Xian's palm? Just as he was wondering, Ji Fong suddenly heard a rumbling sound. It sounded like a boulder rolling, but also like a sudden clap of thunder. Everyone in the garden was shocked. White flames emerged from Xiaoxian's palms. Then, a line of white flames extended from his palms until it reached the middle of the mountain wall. It continued to extend upwards, but at the same time, another line of flames appeared horizontally, extending to both sides. The white flames intersected vertically and horizontally in the shape of a cross. The mountain was shaking, and some small stones that were as small as sand rolled down the mountain. However, these small stones that looked like sand made a deafening sound, as if a landslide was sweeping down. The rumbling sound was like thunder, incessantly ringing in the ears. Whoosh! Red flames spewed out from all parts of the mountain. The more flames there were, the more the mountain trembled. It was like a dormant volcano had finally awakened. Splendid sparks flew everywhere, and the flames continued to rise from the mountain. The rising flames from the mountain reflected a red light in Xiaoxian's eyes. But it was like a grain of sand in the midst of the white flames. Gigu and the rest looked in that direction in shock. Was the signing of the contract so loud? If Jifeng and the rest in the garden knew what they were thinking, they would be even more shocked. No, you're thinking too much. This was not the case when they signed the contract. In the past, no matter which tribe or organization they signed the contract with, even if there was a huge commotion when they left the seal, it would only be within a limited area. It would not be so intense. It gave people the feeling that everything was under the mountain's control. However, at this moment, the situation in front of him was more like a mountain that could not be controlled. Forget about control. Jifeng even felt like the mountain was letting it go. Jifeng's eyelids twitched. He felt like things were getting out of his control. The rumbling in the garden grew more intense. Strong winds blew, stirring up fine dust. The leaves of the flowers and plants were swept into the air by the wind. It was like a storm was coming. Seeing this situation, the Mu family's patriarch was so shocked that he sucked in a breath. However, he choked on the dust in the air due to the vibrations. Immediately, he coughed violently, as if he wanted to cough out the blood in his heart. The others ignored the coughing patriarch and stared blankly at the mountain in the middle of the garden. The elder from the Yi family was even more shocked. Wasn't it just signing a contract? How could this be? Outside the palace, the people who had been paying attention also heard the rumbling from the palace. If not for the bright sun and clear sky, they would have thought it was thunder. What happened? The timid person's teeth were chattering as he asked, his voice trembling. Some people quickly recovered and laughed at the others for making a fuss. It's normal. Signing a contract in the heaven and earth contract will naturally cause a huge commotion. There's no need to worry. Really? Many people were doubtful. They could not be blamed for being timid. The disaster back then had scared them to the point that they had developed a phobia. Hearing this sound and commotion made them feel uneasy. Of course it's true. The people who said there was no need to worry tried their best to maintain a calm expression and insisted on their views. They had to keep up the act even if they had to. Bo-yi repeatedly reminded his subordinates to pay attention to their surroundings so that no one could steal anything during the chaos. Abuli and the others looked at them curiously and sighed. So that's how signing a contract works. In a nearby house, Suli stood up. His eyes flashed as he said to the Changle people, "Something's wrong." He loved to take advantage of the chaos to make a fortune. It was not that he was interested in the gemstones. He just wanted to see those people's helpless expressions when they lost their belongings and wanted to bite the Chonglis to death. Keep an eye on the gambling table. Once there's a chance, start. Before Suli could finish, Wu He shook his head vehemently. I'm not doing it. If you want to do it, go ahead. I'm not participating. Chapter 831. Coward. This was how the others looked at Wu He. Some even looked at him with undisguised disdain. However, Wu He didn't care about their gazes. He still looked like a coward and wouldn't change his mind. As the chief, Su Lily should reprimand Wu He, who was unambitious. This was not in line with the Changle organization's excellent style. However, when he was about to speak, Su Lily remembered how Wu He and the others were captured by the flaming horns. From then on, they became messengers. After some thought, Suli said, "Fine." He then looked around. Is there anyone else who thinks the same as Wu He? Another 4 people backed out. They were all people who often worked with the Changles. They were all people who were traumatized by the Yanjiao. Suli didn't force them. In fact, he was traumatized as well. However, he didn't think it would be a problem if they just got involved. Just as everyone was about to make a move, something strange happened. Look, what's that? Is there something wrong with my eyes? Why do I see a purple light over there? I see it too. Yes, it's purple. Those who were paying attention to the palace realized that there was a faint purple light over there. At the center of the palace, in the garden where the Heaven and Earth contract book was kept, the red flames that were spewing out from the mountain were gradually tinged with purple. This purple color was increasing. At first, it was only on the periphery of the flames, but then it seeped in. Xiao Xian's hand was still on the mountain wall. However, the white lines of fire had gradually formed a large intersecting shaman pattern on the mountain wall. The lines of fire extended across the mountain wall without any obstruction. This pattern made up of white lines of fire almost covered the entire mountain wall. The mountain wall was 20 meters tall, so this shaman pattern was almost 20 meters tall. Ancestor Shaman Seal. The old man from the Yi family was shocked. More and more flames spewed out from the mountain. The red flames were quickly replaced by purple. Even the surrounding flames were turning purple at the same speed. Purple flames. What shocked the crowd even more was that, during the process of the formation of the white magical pattern, the markings left behind by the other clans after signing the contract were all moving. It wasn't the totem that moved, but the mountain itself. It was the mountain that moved all the places with the totem marks. His goal was to clear out more space for the shaman patterns. The people from Royal City who were watching all of this became even more silent, their eyes almost lifeless. The scene before him had far exceeded Jifeng's expectations. The fire seed in this mountain was purple, but that color had not appeared in a long time. Jifeng only knew about it from his ancestors' notes. Later on, some people said that the fire seed in the mountain was a primitive fire seed. It would not be integrated into the bloodstream like the human tribes, so it could not escape the fate of being weak. Jifeng had always thought that the mountain would never be able to emit the purple flames of its original form. But now, the purple flames had appeared again. The reason? Jifeng stared intently at the giant progenitor shaman seal on the mountain wall, as well as the two-horned totem in the center of the progenitor shaman seal. He tightened his grip on the sword hilt, and the veins on the back of his hand bulged. All the muscles on his body were trembling slightly. Why did it have to be Yanjiao? He suddenly regretted signing the contract with Yanjiao. When the contract was signed, it meant that he could not easily attack Yanjiao's flaming river basin, no matter if it was in the open or in the dark. But thinking of something, Jifeng lowered his eyelids and relaxed his grip on the sword hilt. A strange smile appeared on his face, but he quickly hid it so no one saw it. The mountain that served as the Heaven and Earth contract book was bursting with flames from every part of it. The flames shot straight up, and the purple flames began to spread in all directions. The roof and eaves of the palace were covered in a layer of hazy purple light. This was caused by the purple flames. As time passed, the mysterious purple light grew stronger and stronger. The area covered by the purple light extended outwards from the palace. The flowing purple flames spread outwards from the palace. Soon, some of the streets, houses, people, and other objects in the center of the royal city were enveloped in the purple flames. The streets were filled with cries of surprise. Everyone who had been in their houses, no matter what they had been doing, came out now. Everywhere on the streets, there were people dressed in different styles. They were either nobles or travelers. They all stood outside in shock, looking at the palace as if they were on a pilgrimage. At this moment, the sky above the palace was almost purple. At this moment, the light of the sun seemed to be suppressed. The streets became congested. The roads that used to be wide enough for huge beasts to pass through were now filled with people. Many of the beasts could not move forward, nor could they retreat. They were all people. This was the first time they could clearly feel how many people there were in the royal city. More importantly, the Heaven and Earth contract was a new level of mystery in their minds. They had only heard of it from their elders, or experienced it in the royal city. But this was the first time this had happened. Even the stories left behind by their elders did not mention it. The fire seed's aura emanated from the palace. It did not belong to any tribe, but it did not have the strong repulsion of an alien fire seed. Instead, it aroused people's admiration and respect for the fire seed. Those who still retained their tribal habits had the urge to kneel down and worship it. At the gambling den, the gamblers had already forgotten about their bet. Abuli and the rest also turned their attention to the palace, trying to guess what had happened there. Could it be that something had changed? Did they need reinforcements? Should they call for reinforcements in Russian? However, there were still people who remembered the bet. For example, the leader of the gambling den, Bo Yi. Unlike his excitement and eagerness when he placed his bet, Bo Yi's face was deathly pale. Large beads of sweat dripped from his forehead, and he didn't even bother to wipe them off. His eyes darted around rapidly. Those who knew him well knew that he was deep in thought. He was seriously calculating a large number of calculations. Bo Yi was calculating the result of this bet. Similar to EC's ability to predict things that had happened, were happening, or had yet to happen based on the changes in the environment and details, even though Bo Yi wasn't at EC's level. Generally speaking, based on what had happened, after careful consideration, he had a 70% chance of being correct. However, every time Bo Yi calculated, the conclusion he came up with sent chills down his spine. The first time the purple light appeared, he calculated that there was a 30% chance that Abuli would win. Although 30% was not much of an advantage, it was a blow to their confidence. This was the beginning of change. The second time was when the purple light enveloped the palace. He calculated that there was a 50% chance that he would lose. The third time was when the purple light spread to the streets of the royal city. There was a 70% chance that Abuli would win. Now the purple light was still spreading. Bo Yi did not dare to calculate any further. What should I do? Bo Yi looked at the mountain of items on the table. Luckily, it was only 5. If it was 110 or 100, how could he survive? That's not right. 5 is not a small amount. If he really lost everything in the gambling den, I can't take it lying down. Bo Yi swallowed his saliva and pulled the person beside him back to reality. He lowered his voice and whispered a few words. That person's expression changed, but he quickly recovered. Putting on a similar expression as the others, he quietly retreated. Every few steps he took, he would pause for a moment. His lips moved quickly, passing the words to the people there in a way that others couldn't hear. Then he continued to retreat to the next place. After that, the people in the gambling house who received the news began to move. There was no need for unnecessary eye contact, as they had already begun to cooperate. Some were responsible for blocking the view. Some were loudly speculating about the current situation to divert the attention of the people around them, and some were quietly moving the money on the gambling table. Bo Yi had his eyes on the items the tribesmen had placed down at the beginning. For example, those bags of crystals. They probably didn't count how many there were in there, right? He wanted to use this opportunity to move some of the items out. If he was forced to pay up, he would at least have to pay less. He also thought about taking all the items and running away. But if he did that, his gambling den would be ruined, and he would not be able to stay in the royal city any longer. Just as he was thinking about what to use to trick these tribesmen, Bo Yi heard a loud shout. Someone's stealing from the table. Bo Yi almost vomited blood. Which bastard shouted that? He looked towards the direction of the shout, but could only see the crowd. He could not find the person who had just shouted. However, the shout also alerted the people who had been looking at the palace. Stealing? Who's stealing? Kill them. The gamblers stared at the table. It's the gambling den, I saw it. Someone in the crowd said. Under the murderous gazes, Bo Yi braced himself and shouted back at the gamblers. Bullshit, this is slander. Just as the gamblers were about to clash with the gambling den's people, a few figures flashed past. Each of them ran in a different direction. Some were in charge of covering, while others were in charge of stealing the items on the table. The gambling den is stealing again. A shrill voice shouted from the crowd. I want my items back. I want them back too. Bo Yi was about to vomit blood. It really wasn't their people this time. Someone was causing trouble. Whoosh, this seemed to have opened a valve. Some of the spectators and gamblers who had been hiding their intentions began to spill out. Why not take some during the chaos? Just a little bit, then run away. The items that Abuli and the others took out made many people greedy for them. Faced with the crazy crowd, the gambling den's people guarding the tables could not hold them off. If this was in the past, they would be able to hold off the gamblers' attacks. But today, there were too many people coming out of the palace. With the addition of the surrounding gamblers, they could not hold them off. Plus, there were people who were skillfully breaking through the gambling den's defensive perimeter. Boss, we can't hold them off. The veins on Bo Yi's forehead were bulging. He took a few deep breaths and was about to say something when a tiger-like roar came from the crowd. Roar, a warrior from the water tiger tribe, had tiger-like stripes all over his body. He opened his mouth 3 times bigger and let out a roar that caused visible ripples in the air. Ching Yi from the drumming tribe also had crocodile totemic tattoos on his body. He was no longer as gentle as before. Now he was like a cold predator. A low rumbling sound came from his throat. Yu and the others from the Pooh tribe had brightly painted eyelids. Their frog-like croaks were not obvious in the crowd. But from the wooden spikes that came out of their fingers, it was clear that they were about to make their move. Those who took our things, don't let a single one of them go. When Abuli saw that the large crystal that he had bet on the gambling table had disappeared, he jumped up in anger. Then his 2 large feet stomped on the ground quickly. Those who were not familiar with the drumming tribe would think that he was hopping mad. But those who were familiar with the drumming tribe knew that those big feet had their uses. On another street in the royal city, Sumya tribesmen were squinting their eyes, trying their best to see their surroundings. Suddenly, their bodies froze and they fell to the ground at the same time. The people around saw the short and fat guys lying on the ground and thought that they were going to dig a hole. Just as they were about to say something, the short and fat guys got up and called out to their companions, "Someone's stealing our things at the gambling den." When the others heard that, they picked up their weapons and ran towards the gambling den. The people around them started talking. They heard what the short and fat guys said. Although they couldn't pronounce it correctly, they still understood the gist of it. Gambling den. There's only one gambling den in the royal city. The few of them looked at each other, eager to watch the show. Let's go take a look. Chapter 832. More and more people from the royal city rushed to the street where the gambling house was located. Although many people knew about the gambling house, not everyone had the time and interest to gamble. But now that they heard about the disturbance, many people were interested. After all, there were people from another continent involved in this incident. They were curious. The gambling house was already in chaos. Totemic power exploded one after another. Various patterns appeared. Roars and screams, the sound of fists and swords clashing, and the sound of broken objects all mixed together. The totemic power of the drumming tribe members rose rapidly, and their bodies underwent obvious changes. The 30 or so people who came here together rushed towards the people holding the water moonstones. Others might have made a mistake, but the people of the drumming tribe wouldn't. They had an innate ability to sense the water moonstones. As long as it was nearby, they could sense it. Although there were water moonstones in the royal city, there weren't many of them. Even if there were, the people of the royal city wouldn't take them out and hide them. When it came to betting, other than the drumming tribe, no one else would bet on water moonstones. So, those who had water moonstones near the gambling house must have stolen them from the gambling table. They didn't need to be polite to those who took advantage of the chaos to steal. Wei, the vice leader of the Yanjiao hunting team, and the hunting team leaders, Mai and Chung, also brought people to the gambling house. When Xiao Xian, Gigu, Ao, Ta, and other team leaders weren't around, they were the ones who led the team. They rushed over immediately after receiving the news, along with people from other tribes in the team. If only one tribe received the news, it wouldn't be a big deal. Maybe someone got into a conflict somewhere and asked for help. But suddenly, all the tribes asked for help at the same time. This was a serious matter. At first, they thought that the royal city really wanted to kill them. They only found out the whole story on the way here. Looking at the chaotic battlefield, the leaders looked at each other and rushed to the battlefield at the same time. They didn't shout, "Stop, we can talk slowly," or "Everyone calm down." They didn't even think about whether they could win this fight on the busiest street in the royal city. If he was robbed, bullied, or beaten, what should he do? As long as there was a shred of Yanjiao blood left in them, there was only one choice. A direct confrontation. Wei, Mai, and Chung rushed into the most intense battle and faced the people from the gambling house. Mai tilted his head to avoid the incoming fist. He reached out to grab the man without even looking and flung him to the side. The Yanjiao man's strength directly flung the man into the room on the second floor of the casino. He crashed through the wooden window and fell into the room. When the soldiers who had just arrived at Yanjiao saw that Wei and the others had already rushed in, they did not hesitate to rush in. The other tribesmen from the Flaming River Valley who heard the news rushed over. When they saw that the Yanjiao had already started fighting, they didn't hesitate. Attack! In battle mode, the Flaming Horn tribesmen's bones were hard and their explosive power was strong. With the advantage of their physique, they charged forward and pushed away the people they didn't know in front of them. They were not on the Flaming River tribe's side anyway, so they didn't show any mercy when they charged forward. Those who were hit by the Yanjiao tribesmen were sent flying along with their swords. At the same time, the sound of bones breaking could be heard. Other than the Yanjiao tribesmen, the other tribesmen from the Flaming River Valley had all followed the Yanjiao into the forest to hunt, so they were also a little ferocious. Therefore, when they exploded and there were more people, the atmosphere was different. The spectators in the royal city were all stunned. Their impression of the tribesmen on the other side of the sea changed. Ferocious. All of them were ferocious. They were really ferocious. It was as if they were fierce beasts in the forest whose prey had been snatched away. In just a short span of time, the bustling street in the royal city had become a battlefield. As more and more people joined in, the scale of the battle continued to expand. The people who were sent flying crashed into the houses on both sides of the street. There were holes in the walls, and the people who fell into the houses broke the tables, chairs, and shelves inside. The shops on both sides of the battlefield suffered, but the shop owners were not in a hurry. Those who didn't want to be involved in the battle started calculating the compensation. When this battle was over, they would pay a visit to the organizations that destroyed their shops. They even hoped that there were many tribesmen who fell in. That way, they could extort a lot of gemstones from the tribesmen. The owner of a wine shop was quickly writing down the losses in his shop. He didn't forget which organization, tribe, or caravan had fallen into his shop. Even if he wanted to extort a large sum of money, he had to have a reasonable reason. Another person fell in. The only undamaged table in the corner of the shop was smashed. The owner was disappointed that this person wasn't a tribesman. The man who crashed into the room cried out in pain. The sword in his hand was lost when he was kicked away. After getting up, he looked left and right, picked up 2 table legs, and rushed out again. Bowie looked at the badly damaged gambling house, then at the crowd of people in front of the gambling house. His face turned green with anger. What was even more infuriating was that there were short and fat men with long beards running around, shouting, "The gambling house doesn't want to admit their losses. They're robbing us." Their pronunciation was a little strange, but they could still be understood. Hearing this, Bowie was so angry he wanted to vomit blood again. He wanted to say that the robbers were from the Chonglis. If he still couldn't tell who was causing trouble, he wouldn't be the head of the gambling house. However, the others refused to listen to him. It didn't matter if the tribesmen believed him or not. The gamblers didn't want to believe him. Or rather, they knew deep down, but they just didn't want to believe it. This was such a good opportunity to take advantage of the chaos. They had lost so much money to the gambling house in the past. They would be idiots if they didn't get their money back now. Some of the gamblers even shouted, "The gambling house doesn't want to admit their losses." Bowie swore in his heart. Once this was over, he would wring their heads off. Ignoring everything else, Bowie looked at the big bearded men who were short in stature but nimble in the battle like loaches. He called out to his subordinates, "Get those fatties to shut up first." The tribesmen pushed the people in front of them aside with their short and thick hands. After a while, they got up and shouted. This made some of the people in Royal City who didn't know what was going on hesitate. They were all from the Royal City, so they would definitely help the Royal City side. But when they heard the reason, they stopped moving forward. Should they get involved in this mess? However, some greedy people wanted to take advantage of the situation to blackmail them. They would only help if the gambling house offered them some benefits. Bo Yi's face darkened with anger. While Deepai was shouting excitedly, a man suddenly rushed out and swung his sword at him. Deepai quickly ran away in fear, but the people behind him still kept their eyes on him. Then, 2 more tribesmen came to surround Digu. Digu was so excited that he forgot his chief's warning. He ran away from the place where there were a lot of people. Among the tribesmen, he ran the furthest. The others had their own people to help them when they were surrounded, but he couldn't. Even if he called for help now, it was useless. Deepai regretted it, so he could only run. The ground of the royal city was too hard. If it was dirt, he would have dug a hole long ago. The 3 men purposely forced Deepai out of the circle. Being in the circle was advantageous for Deepai. The 3 men's movements were hindered, but once he left the circle, the tables would turn. The gambling house was familiar with this street, so they had the advantage. Deepai tripped over something and rolled like a ball. By the time he stopped, the 3 men had caught up to him. Although Deepai couldn't see his surroundings clearly, he could still see the light reflected off the metal weapons. The murderous intent from the weapons made Deepai's beard stand on end. However, in the next moment, The three men who were charging at Deepai flew backwards and rolled a few times on the ground before stopping. The people from the gambling house who couldn't get up felt pain spread through their bodies. They spat out 2 mouthfuls of blood and almost fainted. When they saw who attacked them, they were shocked and angry. Bamiyu, before he could finish, he choked on the blood in his throat. His finger trembled as he pointed at Bami. His eyes were filled with hatred, as if he didn't understand why the black bears would stand against them. Usually, there wouldn't be any direct conflicts between the famous groups in the royal city. The Fubo Casino was quite famous in the royal city. After all, there was only one casino in the entire royal city. Although the gambling house and the black bears weren't on good terms, they didn't directly fall out with each other. Who would have thought that the black bears would help the Yanjiao people at this critical moment? Who are the black bears helping? Another person from the gambling house forced himself to finish the sentence. Bami didn't speak. Instead, it was Maura who walked forward with his bare paw. He'd used this paw to slap the man. He snickered. Do you even need to ask? Thanks. Knowing that he was saved, Deepa was excited. He got up and prepared to run towards the Yanjiao people. After a few steps, he turned back and narrowed his eyes at Bami and the others. His beard twitched. You're not from the Flaming River? Who are you? His eyesight was the worst among the tribesmen. Even though he was close, he couldn't see their faces clearly. He only saw a few blurry silhouettes, so he thought they were strong tribesmen from the Thunder Mountain or Water Tiger tribe. However, when he thought about what he heard and sensed the fire seed energy from these people, he knew they weren't from any of the Flaming River tribes he was familiar with. They weren't from the Longboat or Mang tribe either, but they were indeed helping him. That was why he ran back to ask them. Black Bears, Bami spoke up. I know you guys. Elder Shao Xian mentioned you before. Then Deepa ran away. It wasn't a good time to talk. The tribesmen were never good at fighting. They had already realized their mistake of being too far away from the group. Deepa decided to run to a place with his own people as soon as possible. If he was hunted down, he could find help. The black bears were helping him, but in comparison, Deepa felt that his own people were more trustworthy. The other King City's people were stunned when they saw Bami take action and bring other black bears people over. The smarter ones started to think of the reason, especially the people from the trading party. They knew Bami and the others well. Even if Bami knew the Yanjiao people, he wouldn't help them so decisively. Merchants valued profit. If there wasn't enough profit to motivate them, they wouldn't do something like this. The people from the trading party always thought about profit. But then they thought, that's right. Yanjiao was going to sign a peace treaty with Royal City. This way, the trading party would definitely benefit greatly. They heard that there were a lot of gemstones on the other side of the sea. It would take a lot of effort to rob them, so trading with them was a good choice. But once they got there, they would be in the tribesmen's territory. Looking at the tribesmen who were fighting with the Royal City people, it wouldn't be good to use force. If they helped Yanjiao, maybe the trading party would be able to enjoy better treatment in Yanjiao's territory. Unfortunately, they were one step behind Bami. TSK, the people of the Black Bear Caravan look honest, but they are all very cunning. Fortunately, it wasn't too late for them to see the truth. And so, the people who were originally helping the gambling house against Yanjiao changed their direction. Most of them were from the trading party. The gamblers and the gambling house people were stunned. Who are you helping? The people who changed their direction at the last minute smiled, but didn't say anything. They were helping profit. There were many factors to consider in this matter, but there was a reason why large trading parties were able to develop to their current scale. They knew how to choose the path with the most benefits. At first, they didn't realize it, but after seeing the Black Bear's actions, they understood. It was rare for Royal City to have thousands of people fighting, and it even involved tribesmen from another continent. The Royal City patrols who heard the commotion looked at each other, not knowing what to do. They had no choice but to ask Jisho for help. At the same time, the Changle people who started this mess were gathered in one corner, gloating over the situation. One of them threw a crystal as thick as an arm into the air, showing off the spoils of war. He didn't forget to poke at Wu He, who was huddled in a corner, not saying a word. Wu He ignored the sarcastic remarks and yawned. Just as he was about to tell Su Li that he was going back to sleep and that he wouldn't be joining the celebration party, he took 2 steps towards the door and his face turned pale. It was as if his entire body was frozen stiff. Su Li, who was sitting at the head of the table, no longer had that smug smile on his face. It was replaced with a serious expression, and there was a deep sense of fear in his eyes. The laughing crowd followed their gaze. It was the door. The person closest to the door pushed it open, then quickly retreated. After taking a few steps back, he looked at the open door and saw the person standing there silently. There was no breathing, no heartbeat. When the person outside the door stood there silently, he didn't seem to exist at all. No one knew how long he had been there. Wuhi's voice trembled. Ganxie. Chapter 833. Wuhi's first fear was Xiao Xian. His second fear wasn't Chief Su Li but Ganxie. Wuhi's teeth chattered as he looked at Ganxie blocking the door. When he was released by the Yanjiao on the other side of the continent, he didn't dare to do anything in Yanjiao territory for a long time, but he still observed them. Because of that, Wuhi wanted to know more about the Yanjiao tribe. The more he observed, the more he realized that there were many special things in the Yanjiao tribe. For example, the wolf with 3 eyes. He heard that it used to be an ordinary beast that wasn't even considered a fearsome beast. Another example was the giant mountain eagle. It was said to have been raised since it was young. Other than the Hui tribe, it was the only giant mountain eagle raised by the tribesmen. Wuhi knew very well how difficult it was to deal with the giant mountain eagles. There was also the bird-like creature and many other strange things. However, none of these were enough to make Wuhi so wary. Wuhi had the urge to run when he saw Ganxie standing 5 steps away from him. However, he felt that some things should be cleared up. After all, he didn't participate in this incident. Just as Wuhi was about to defend himself, Ganxie slowly raised his hand. There was a ground ice stone in his hand. It was one that the Chonglis had missed when they were trying to steal it. They were in a hurry to leave, so they didn't go back and pick it up. Sizzle! The ground ice stone crumbled into dust in Ganxie's hand. The atmosphere in the room stagnated, especially for the person who was also playing with the ground ice stone. Although the stone wasn't too hard, it wasn't so easy to crush it. Furthermore, without the use of any tools, he could easily do this with his fingers. Ganxie's fingers didn't change at all. There wasn't even a mark. Su Li's expression darkened. He stared at Ganxie cautiously. He felt a sense of danger. When he met Ganxie's red eyes, his hair stood on end. On the other side, on the street where the gambling house was located, the brawl spread to half the street in a short time. By the time Ji Shou and his men arrived, the houses and shops on both sides of the street were no longer intact. Broken tiles were strewn all over the place. Especially when he heard those short and fat-bearded men spreading the news that the royal city people were cheating and stealing, he was so angry that his blood vessels were about to explode. They all needed to be taught a lesson. All of you, stop. A roar filled with intense anger spread throughout the entire street. At the same time, many people in golden armor appeared, almost surrounding the entire street, especially in the center of the battlefield. Guards with bows appeared on some roofs along the street. Their cold eyes and sharp arrows were aimed at the battlefield. Under the shroud of the purple chi, the reflection of the armor was somewhat strange, causing those who wanted to take advantage of the chaos to shudder. The sound of the wooden whistle rang out with a specific rhythm, and the scattered Yanjiao soldiers quickly gathered in the direction of the sound. Ji Shou narrowed his eyes at the sight. These Yanjiao soldiers were obviously well-trained, but they were different from the royal city soldiers. Their teamwork was honed through hunting. It was no wonder these people didn't have an advantage against the Yanjiao soldiers. Most of the people lying on the ground were from the royal city, but there were very few Yanjiao soldiers on the ground. The few that were on the ground were taken away when the Yanjiao soldiers closed the battlefield. There should still be people nearby taking care of the injured. When Ji Shou and the guards appeared, Wei blew the whistle for them to stop and gather. He had no doubt that if he ignored them, the Wang Qingjun would shoot. They didn't want to clash head-on with the guards in King City's territory. There was no benefit to it. The other Flaming River tribes followed the Yanjiao's lead. When they saw the Yanjiao soldiers stop, they did the same. The tribesmen stopped making a ruckus and quickly hid behind the Yanjiao soldiers, hiding their short, fat bodies. They preferred dark places where there was no light at all. It was dangerous to be exposed to Yangguang. It wasn't just the Yanjiao people. When the other royal city people saw Ji Shou, they immediately stopped and wanted to run. But the guards had already surrounded them. If they ran, the guards would mercilessly turn them into porcupines. Seeing the chaos on the street stop, Ji Shou's unhappiness subsided. At least he still had his authority. These people were still afraid of him and the guards. But in the next moment, Jisho heard a loud bang. The ground shook. The sound didn't come from this street, but from a distance. But it happened after he shouted for them to stop. It was like a provocation. The people on the street saw Jisho's face darken. The veins on his forehead bulged, and he looked like he wanted to eat someone. This made the royal city people, especially the gamblers, even more uneasy. They didn't dare to look directly at Jisho, only watching his movements from the corners of their eyes. Jisho tilted his head slightly. Without a word, the small group behind him quickly left, heading towards the source of the commotion. The happiest people were the people at the gambling house. They had suffered a great loss this time, losing both their people and their money. General, a junior manager of the gambling house, ran over to Jisho as if he had seen his savior. General? Some of the Flaming River tribesmen didn't know what a general was, but he seemed powerful. General, help! Before the manager of the gambling den could finish, he felt a gust of wind. The next moment, he felt a piercing pain in his abdomen. He spat out a mouthful of blood as the strong force sent him flying backward. The people on the street all shuddered, as if the kick just now had landed on their bodies, and they felt as if they had experienced it themselves. The muscles on Bo Yi's face twitched. His anger was quickly suppressed when Jisho looked over. He stopped himself from taking a step forward. Jisho didn't even look at the person who was kicked out, as if he was just a piece of trash. His eyes were cold and his murderous aura exploded from his body. The people on the street, especially those from Yanjiao, tensed up and looked at Jisho cautiously. Wei, Mai and the others' eyelids twitched. This person was much stronger than the people at the gambling house. He also seemed to have a murderous aura, like a hunter. However, Yanjiao's hunters were trained to hunt fearsome beasts. This person's targets were probably humans. There were many strong people in the royal city, such as this person. Jisho's kick was covered in murderous aura. The person from the gambling house didn't scream, but it sounded like an inaudible wail echoed in everyone's ears. Jisho didn't draw his sword, but he didn't seem any less dangerous. He looked around coldly and slowly walked forward. He didn't move quickly and didn't look imposing, but those in the royal city who knew Jisho didn't underestimate him. Even the black bears were nervous. Jisho walked casually on the messy street, the wood under his feet cracking under his feet. With every step he took, the people from the royal city took a step back in unison, their eyes filled with fear. Wei and the others didn't retreat. When they saw Jisho reach for them, they said, "You want to attack us too? You people from the royal city stole first. You can't afford to lose and you steal." Before Wei could finish, Jisho was already laughing, his face full of disdain. "You should be thankful that Flaming Horn has Xiao Xian. Otherwise, no matter what, anyone who caused trouble in King City would be killed. If it weren't for the special situation today, he would have washed the street with blood." Jisho was mocking Yanjiao. Without Xiao Xian, Yanjiao and the Flaming River Valley would be nothing. They wouldn't be able to walk the streets of the royal city peacefully and cause such a ruckus. If people from other tribes or organizations in the royal city heard this, they would have been angry. It was an insult. However, Jisho was facing a group of Yanjiao tribesmen. When they heard Jisho's words, the Flaming Horn tribesmen had an expression of awe. "We're very lucky too." Jisho. It was like being fed a mouthful of moldy grain. Jisho felt like he couldn't communicate with these tribesmen. But the Yanjiao tribesmen really thought the same. They didn't think there was anything to be angry about. Shouldn't they be proud that their tribe had such a powerful person? Jisho took a deep breath. He didn't want to waste time with these tribesmen. He swept his gaze across the people on the street and said coldly, "Put down what you shouldn't have or I'll kill you." Thud. Slap. They'd planned to leave after getting some money, but now they threw it away like it was a hot rock. Compared to the benefits before them, their lives were more important. Some of them still held on to the hope that Jisho would not be able to find them. However, they were bumped into by their companions, whose eyes warned them not to throw their lives away for such trivial things. Jisho usually didn't care about small fights in the city, but once he did, it would be cruel. It was not an exaggeration to call it a bloodbath. He might even take his anger out on them. They didn't want to be implicated. Jisho stood there indifferently, as if he didn't know the people in the crowd were struggling. A group of guards quickly walked down the street, picking up the things thrown away and gathering them together. "Look what's missing," said Jisho. The tribesmen who'd placed their bets looked at Wei and Mai. With their agreement, they started searching for their own things. They didn't take anything randomly. They didn't care about the other gamblers in the royal city. There was no need to steal. They just needed to get their own. "Where's my crystal?" Abuli shouted, dissatisfied. After hearing that Xiao Xian was called crystal, Abuli changed his tone. Many people had seen Abuli's crystal before. It couldn't be faked. Everyone turned to look at the people in the gambling house. "We didn't take it." Bowie panted heavily. He had to be the scapegoat. "Here." An emotionless voice sounded. At the same time, the crystal as thick as an arm was thrown at Abuli. Abuli caught the crystal and looked at Ganxie happily. "Ganxie, you found it for me?" "Thank you." Ganxie's clothes were torn in many places. The most obvious were the knives and arrows that pierced through his body. Seeing Ganxie like this, the Yanjiao people weren't too surprised. When they fought on the streets, they had to protect their own lives. But Ganxie was different. He fought with his life on the line. They had seen this many times. "Ah, Ganxie, you've been stabbed." Abuli shouted. "Quick, quick, quick." The people from King City thought that this big-footed tycoon was going to call for a witch doctor. Abuli threw the crystal in his hand to the person beside him, then grabbed the handle of the dagger that was exposed on Ganxie's body and pulled it out. He pulled it out, the streets fell silent again. "Hey, there's another arrow." He pulled it out again. There was no blood, no flesh and blood. There wasn't even a cry of pain. No, it was more accurate to say that Ganxie, who had been hit countless times, didn't make a sound. His expression didn't even change. It was as if he couldn't feel the injuries on his body. "Hey, you have a lot of things on you. But they're too small. It's hard to pull them out." Abuli felt that since Ganxie helped him find the crystal, he should help. However, Ganxie was getting impatient. He pushed Abuli away, and the hidden weapons that had been stabbed into his body came out. They fell to the ground with a clatter. Jishou, the guards. Luckily, they had undergone strict training. Otherwise, if their hands trembled, the arrows on their bows would have been shot. If they shot by mistake, they would be killed by Jishou. The royal city people gulped. They looked at Ganxie as if he was a monster. Thus, Ganxie gained another nickname in the royal city people's hearts, Undying Ganxie. Jishou's face twitched as he watched Ganxie expel the hidden weapons from his body without a single drop of blood. One of the guards hurried over and whispered something into Jishou's ear. They were the people who had been sent to check on the explosion. Hearing the report, Jishou's pupils constricted. His expression changed. The explosion came from one of the Chongli's strongholds. It had been destroyed. Suli was heavily injured and was rescued by other Chonglis who had just arrived at Royal City. The number of casualties was unknown. The entire stronghold had been flattened and turned into sand. It was impossible to tell what it used to be. No other clues could be found. The person who had caused this was the person who had just arrived. Jishou only had one word to say about the Chonglis. They deserved it. However, there was indeed a dangerous person in Yanjiao's group. Ganxie? Other than Yanjiao's Xiao Xian, Jishou made a mental note of the second dangerous person. Whoosh! Shouts came from other parts of the royal city. However, it wasn't because someone was causing trouble. The purple aura above the royal city was beginning to change. It was retracting like fog. In the palace, the signing ceremony for the heaven and earth contract was about to end. Chapter 834. When Xiao Xian walked out of the garden after signing the contract, the others were silent, especially the heads of the noble families. They looked at Xiao Xian strangely with complicated emotions. However, Jifeng was the same as before. He chatted with Xiao Xian about old stories in Royal City. At least on the surface, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Xiao Xian only heard about the large-scale brawl on Royal City's busiest street after he came out. However, they weren't the ones who attacked first. Logically speaking, the gambling house and Chang'e were the ones at fault. Therefore, Jifeng didn't hesitate to discuss with Xiao Xian how to deal with this. It didn't seem unreasonable. However, Gigu and the others knew that if Yanjiao wasn't strong enough and didn't have a special person like Xiao Xian, the royal city wouldn't be so polite to them. The strange phenomenon when the heaven and earth contract was signed was enough to make the people of Royal City wary. Even if they didn't know what Xiao Xian left behind, they could guess based on Jifeng and the five heads' reactions. Xiao Xian was the key to their change of attitude. Yanjiao's grand elder was indeed different from the rest. They rejoiced that Xiao Xian was Yanjiao. If Xiao Xian wasn't from Yanjiao and was born in another tribe, Yanjiao would probably be in a different situation now. The farce on the street ended with the Yanjiao people taking their belongings back to where they were settled, and the gambling house paying for all the losses. Many people in Royal City were surprised that the Ji family let the tribesmen off so easily. Many times, things couldn't be avoided just because you were in the right. However, this time, the Ji family and the other 5 noble families of Royal City all had the same attitude. This made people think deeply, especially those who were good at conspiracy theories. Their brains spun quickly and thought of many possibilities. Among them, the most active were the caravans. The contract between Royal City and Yanjiao was an equal peace contract. When the time came, travel teams from both sides would be able to cross over. Thinking that the tribe was rich in gems, but there were very few gold mines, the caravan members trembled with excitement as soon as they thought about how great the business opportunity was. This time, without waiting for the Black Bears to say anything, many other trading parties who happened to be in King City rushed to visit the Flaming Horn tribe's settlement. Inside the palace, Xiao Xian had a private chat with Ji Fong after the signing of the contract. Ji Fong brought up Si. Si would like to meet you in the palace. Ji Fong observed Xiao Xian's reaction as he spoke. He thought Xiao Xian would be enraged at the mention of Si, but that was not the case. Sure. Xiao Xian's tone didn't change. His expression was calm, as if he wasn't surprised that Ji Fong would mention Si. This confused Ji Fong, but as long as he achieved his goal, it was fine. He arranged a place for Xiao Xian and Si to meet alone. After all, Si was the leader of the largest slave trading organization. It wasn't convenient for him to appear in the palace. In fact, very few people knew about Ji Fong and Si's partnership. Before Ji Fong seized the throne, other than a few trusted aides, even Ji Shou didn't know about their partnership. Si Duo's visits to the palace only started after Ji Fong succeeded in seizing the throne. It was also because of the Flaming Horn incident that more people knew about their collaboration. This time, Si came with a humble attitude and apologized for his attack on the Flaming Horn tribe. Xiao Xian ignored that. It would be strange if Si was apologetic, more like remorseful. However, it wasn't easy for Si to put on a low profile. Just tell me why you're here, Xiao Xian said. Si's prepared speech was wasted. Still, it was better to get straight to the point. Si's goal was simple. He wanted Xiao Xian to help him find the chief's bone lock. He used some benefits from one of the robbers in exchange for some information about Robber 7. None of the information was related to Robber 7's whereabouts. This was because robbers rarely revealed their whereabouts to others. Even when they worked together, they would keep some information to themselves. This was a robber's habit. Si didn't place all his hopes on this information. However, while Robber 7's whereabouts were unknown, he knew some of Robber 7's dark history. For example, Robber 7 had been captured by Yanjiao more than once. More specifically, Robber 7 had suffered at the hands of Yanjiao's Xiao Xian more than once. This was why Si came to Xiao Xian after Ji Fong mediated. Robber 7's ability to escape was too great. Even the top 3 in the robber family might not be able to catch Robber 7. Although Robber 7's ranking wasn't high, he was getting harder to deal with. Even if they found him, they wouldn't be able to catch him. Bai isn't the only slave trading organization. Just because we don't attack Flaming River doesn't mean others won't. However, if you can help me find the chief's bone lock, I'm willing to sacrifice some benefits for them to avoid Flaming River Alliance's territory, said Si. Yanjiao can do that too, replied Xiao Xian. But it'll still cause a lot of trouble. I think Yanjiao doesn't want people to go missing in the next few years or even decades, continued Si. With Si's help, it would save a lot of manpower and time. What Yanjiao lacked right now was manpower and time. Everyone knew that the contract with Royal City was only a temporary truce. Once the contract expired, there would be an unavoidable conflict. The Yi family's divination was unpredictable. Who could accurately predict the future? Any small change could lead to a completely different outcome. The safest way was to develop oneself. Only when one was strong enough would they have enough capital to negotiate and solve all problems. If they diverted manpower and time to deal with those problems, the development of the Flaming River region would definitely slow down. With Si's promise, even if it couldn't solve all the problems, it would be worth it to solve a part of it. However, Xiao Xian didn't answer immediately. After a moment of silence, he said, "Deal?" With Xiao Xian agreeing to help, Si sighed in relief. At least there was still a high chance of getting the chief's bone lock back. On his way out, C suddenly paused at the door and turned to ask, I heard that you know the E family's divination skills. Did you predict that I would come looking for you again because of the chief's bone malak? What do you think? I think so. Motherfucker Yanjiao. C cursed internally. He didn't look at Xiao Xian anymore and walked out. What a shame. His bai was cut off, his bone lock was stolen, he was chased everywhere, and now he had to beg for help. He accepted his defeat at the hands of Xiao Xian, but from now on, he would have to be more careful when it came to Yanjiao. The banquet at the palace was sumptuous, but Ji Fong didn't talk about sparring. Xiao Xian wasn't interested in sparring either. He was distracted. Xiao Xian's absent-mindedness was noticed by everyone, but no one reminded him. Because of the strange phenomenon during the signing of the contract, everyone in the royal city couldn't wait for Yanjiao to leave. They were very curious about these things, but they also knew that they wouldn't be able to get anything out of him. At the beginning of the banquet, some people tried to ask him about it, but Xiao Xian didn't answer. The other flaming horns didn't say much either. Gigu and the others didn't know much about the founder shaman's seal, but they wouldn't reveal even the tiniest bit. Xiao Xian also saw Jiju at the banquet. Compared to the last time he saw Jiju looked even older now. Under normal circumstances, this shouldn't be the case. The Ji family had a long lifespan, and Jiju had the medicinal crops from the farm and the 1,000-grain gold. He shouldn't have aged so much. But considering what had happened in the past few years, it was understandable that Jiju had become like this. The past few years hadn't been peaceful. Large amounts of crops had died in the disaster. Yi Xiong's revenge, the change in the throne, the Yi family's upheaval, and so on had been very torturous. Especially the first one, the farm that Jiju had always cared about. It had suffered heavy losses in the disaster. Many of the crops that had been carefully cared for and had high hopes for had all died. The reorganization after the cataclysm was also very exhausting. Many things had to be personally supervised by Jiju, which was very tiring. If there was anyone in the Ji family that Yanjiao liked, it would be Jiju. Other than the 1,000-grain gold, most of the popular crops in Yanjiao had been given to them by Jiju. Jiju sighed when he saw Xiao Xian again. Years ago, when the late king had decided to kill Yanjiao, Jiju had gone to the palace to vent his anger. Unfortunately, he hadn't been involved in politics and couldn't interfere. The decision of the royal city's 6 noble families couldn't be changed by him alone. But the one who overthrew the throne wasn't an outsider, but a member of the Ji family. It was good that Ji Fong had taken over the throne. At least Jiju approved of Ji Fong's decision to sign a peace treaty with Yanjiao. No matter what others said about Yanjiao, Jiju had his own judgment. Jiju thought that a tribe that could grow good grains was definitely worth making friends with. Jiju was very happy to see Xiao Xian again. After the banquet, he even invited Xiao Xian to the farm for a chat. Xiao Xian didn't refuse. He felt that Jiju must have other matters to discuss with him at this late hour. He let Gigu and the rest go back to check on the others. Xiao Xian followed Jiju out of the city to the farm. Gigu and the rest went directly to Yanjiao's place. Although they'd received reports that everything was fine as the leader, Gigu was still worried. After all, this was royal city territory. He had to see for himself. Also, Xiao Xian had whispered to him about his decision before leaving. Gigu was also concerned. Things didn't look good. Xiao Xian followed Jiju to the farm. Jiju couldn't wait to ask if the seeds he'd given him had been planted and how they were growing. When he heard that the seeds were growing well and that the field had expanded, the 1,000-grain gold situation was under control, Jiju smiled from the bottom of his heart. He stuffed more seeds into Xiao Xian's hands and told him what kind of crops they were and what to pay attention to when planting them. He told Xiao Xian everything. After Xiao Xian noted it down, Jiju paused and said, "Actually, there's another reason I called you here tonight. An old friend wants to see you, but he can't move around." You're tuning in to the Bli Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.